Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Village Council decides to transfer Naruto into the Uchiha. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Naruto slowly trudged after Sasuke, the once orange genin, now resembled walking ground beef. Charred from the burns of fire jutsu, and his several chidori made holes in his chest and belly still gushing blood. Whatever Sasuke had done to him, the bastard Kyuubi was no longer healing him as fast as he should. Our corpseified little ninja still hadn't given up. He still dragged himself after the boy who had thought to leave him for dead. And after all of what Sasuke had done to him, Naruto really should have been dead. But the genin moved onward. He would bring his teammate back, even if he had to do it dead. Somewhere deep in Rice Country, Orochimaru's base was busy with activity. Sasuke was being prepared for that transfer. "It will give you all of Orochimaru-sama's knowledge," the medic ninja said. The medic had no idea how right he was. Sasuke smirked, if only he knew just how it would work. They thought he was just being arrogant, but he had a surprise for his new sensei. One that only he and that man were aware of. It was time. Orochimaru stepped into the room. His arms were peeling and bleeding, and his body was haggard. Without the soul transfer, the Sannin would soon perish. However, the Uchiha had arrived just in time. Not however, before most of his test subjects had killed each other. It was down to only a few left when the Sannin had been informed of the boy's arrival. They were dealt with. After the final preparations were finished, the Serpent Sage began his incursion on the boy's young body and it was completed seamlessly. Once he had transferred himself into the Uchiha, the veteran shinobi began to take control of all the functions of this new body. Right until he saw the jutsu. It was something left to him by Itachi, who had driven him out of the mercenary group Akatsuki shortly after arriving. Little Sasuke remembered his elder brother's words, back at that hotel when the man had come for the Kyuubi brat. "You're too pathetic to gain your own power, Sasuke. Soon, Orochimaru will try to steal the Sharingan, and I will not let our dojutsu fall into his hands." The jutsu activated before he could flee the body, shredding the Sannin's existence. As Orochimaru was being processed, his personality was erased, his memories were distorted and filtered so that only information was left. Jutsu and methods, times and dates, names and places. But Orochimaru's feelings and opinions were gone with his past, his personality, and his memories. The Snake Sage himself was erased from this world. It would be as though Sasuke had memorized all of this from a text. Had learned the countless bits of information in mere moments, or hours, or days. It would take time. The Sannin had learned many things in his life. It would take a long time, and Sasuke's occupied mind would not process the outside world until it was done. The soul transfer wasn't supposed to take this long. He had been there for others, and they never taken more than a single hour. It had been several hours since Sasuke's body had become unresponsive. For those hours, Kabuto was worried that it had failed. He continually checked on the sleeping Uchiha, and he placed the boy's body in the recuperation room. After about 3 hours had passed, the distressed medic was informed there was an intruder on the base. Leaving to find the intruder, he discovered none other than the Kyuubi child. Considering that they had evacuated the facility already, save for him, the body, and 4 others meant to guard them, Kabuto decided he could allow the brat to continue. So he would watch, and see just how far Naruto made it with all the injuries he had. Those 4 stayed hidden as this moving corpse found its way to the recuperation room. Then the medic decided not to risk anymore. He wouldn't let the zombified brat damage his operation. With the order to attack, the one guard Kabuto had brought back inside with him, stepped out and shot a kunai into the intruder. However, instead of reacting the boy just took it. It was like he really was a walking corpse. Then, with a fearful shock, Kabuto realized what the boy was doing. If he released the beast here it would. So that's why he didn't fight back. This was a plan he never thought the future Hokage could pull out. The brightly colored loud mouth had always been about never giving up. But with that much damage done to his body, releasing the demon from its cage was the only thing the kid could do. The brat had followed in hopes that the fox would break free and kill them all. Kabuto was again informed that there was another intruder. It seemed the demon Gaki had led the leaf right to them. Kabuto had to act quickly. There wasn't very many options on how to escape with the body, so he left without it. If Orochimaru's soul transfer hadn't taken, they wouldn't hurt the Uchiha. If it had, then Orochimaru would be able to fake the Uchiha brat's life easily until the Sannin had a chance to escape. Quietly ordering those four to retreat unseen, the medic didn't even look back as he fled from the copy ninja's approach. His body failed him as Naruto finally found his teammate. He had forced himself far past any pain, past life and death itself. Only to drop once he arrived at the base of the enemy. But he could die proud. He had won, maybe not the fight, but the pursuit. He'd finished that. He had kept his promise to Sakura. Sasuke was his now, but the near-dead genin couldn't get them back. He couldn't even move anymore. He could only lie there, waiting for the demon to do its job. Where was he? Why wouldn't the fox heal him already? What had Sasuke done to the demon inside his gut? Haruno Sakura waited at the gate, waiting for what she knew to be impossible. But for that briefest of moments, she had actually hoped that Naruto would be able to beat Sasuke. Even though she knew, never would he be that strong. Finally in the distance, she saw the last members of the retrieval squad returning. Kakashi-sensei was making his way to the village at a speed she couldn't truly follow. As he passed she did catch a glimpse of him, and joy sprang from her heart. He was carrying two people. One was Sasuke and the other had to be Naruto. Even though the idiot was curled up in a blanket, Hitaki Kakashi suppressed his radiating fury, while he watched his only surviving genin as she left the Uchiha's room. She had visited the traitor 7 times in the past 4 days. The Jonin understood that, however, she hadn't even asked about Naruto. Not once. Finally realizing she was being watched, the Kunoichi greeted him. "Oh, hey sensei. Did you come to see Sasuke too?" "Yeah, and I was thinking about going to check up on Naruto after," Kakashi replied lazily. "Would you like to join me?" His little pink student finally failed him completely by shaking her head and turning to the door. "I'd rather not, I'll see him when he gets out." Grabbing her arm, the Jonin darkened. Sakura flinched and let out a whimper when she felt his killing intent. "He may not get out," her sensei informed her venomously. Jerking her head in surprise, Sakura tried to struggle from his grasp. What do you mean sensei?" He didn't answer. Instead the Jonin began walking, while dragging her behind him. When he stopped, they were in the observation room, just above and behind the operation room. Where they were, they would easily be able to see the horrors that were being performed. "Sensei, what are we doing here? If you wanted me to go see Naruto you could have just took us to his usual room. And when do you think you'll get there?" His voice was layered heavily with malice. "What are you talking about? And why wouldn't they let Naruto out of the hospital? He didn't take any unattended medicine, did he?" she asked, beginning to sound annoyed. Grabbing her head in one hand, the legendary copy ninja struggled to only turn her head towards the operation table, and to not twist it any farther. "This is what I've been talking about." Sakura gagged when she saw it. The room in front of her was occupied by the Lady Hokage and her assistant, as well as several others. Some, she could tell, were just there to donate chakra. Among them were many of the village's jonin, commonly known for not being medics. Others were keeping the blood from pooling around the table. So much blood. On the table itself, looked to be an autopsy taking place but with a live person. Strapped down and struggling as his insides were shifted, pulled out, repaired and put back. The medical legend herself was performing healing jutsu after healing jutsu. She was methodical and perpetually moving. Her once voluptuous, seductive body was now discolored, wrinkled and aged. That was once Naruto, the Jonin told her. Lady Tsunade has been working on him the entire time since he was returned from the retrieval mission. Oh my god, what happened to him? She finally turned from the sight, dropping when her sensei's gripping hands opened. Sasuke happened. She couldn't understand. How could Sasuke be responsible for Naruto getting himself hurt? What if Naruto injured himself? Her words were cut off by the thunderous voice of an angry Jonin. Those injuries came from Kaden and Raiden jutsu, more specifically, the Chidori that I taught Sasuke. Kakashi was almost yelling, but for the sake of the Godime's work, kept his volume as low as he was able. Even while his voice dripped with ice and venom, Sasuke intentionally tried to kill Naruto. And very nearly succeeded. Wait, Sasuke would never. Instead of letting her defend the traitor, the enraged Jonin continued. Naruto's own regenerative capabilities are 6 times that of an average shinobi, under normal circumstances. And When it's life-threatening it increases. Yet even after 4 days of treatment from the medical expert Sanin, he is still in critical condition. The girl flinched back when his killing intent flared again. And when I invited you to see him, you'd rather not. I was informed that you hadn't even asked about him. Sakura had dropped to her knees under the killing intent coming off of her sensei. She didn't know that he was so hurt. How was she supposed to know? She couldn't believe that Sasuke would do such a thing or that Naruto could even survive having that many injuries. Then, the pinkette realized in horror, if her beloved had done this, then the Hokage wouldn't stop until he was in prison. What's going to happen to Sasuke now? She asked, and in that moment, she knew terror. When she had shown more concern for Sasuke even after this, Kakashi lost it. Even after what he told her, and the sight of what the Uchiha did, she was now worried that Sasuke would be punished. It took all of his years of regrets to keep himself from killing her. Kakashi, that's enough. Get out now. At the sound of Tsunade's pissed voice, Kakashi looked away from the crumpled form of his passed-out failure of a student, and saw that several of the orderlies in the operation room had also passed out and others were terrified. His killing intent had run through the entire hospital. Grabbing a handful of pink hair he walked to the door and nodded to the Hokage, before leaving the hospital. On his way out, the Jonin tossed his student onto one of the benches just outside. He wasn't sure she'd survive the trip back to her house. Uchiha Sasuke roused himself from one of the most exhausting sleep he'd ever had. At first, the genin was confused about where he was. However, he recognized the flowers Sakura had always left him when he was in the hospital. That meant he was back in the leaf. His Jonin sensei, Kakashi, must have found him. An image of a bloody preteen crawling towards him flashed through Sasuke's mind. Shaking his head, the Uchiha cleared the image away. Naruto was dead now, and nothing could change that. He so badly wished that his stubborn teammate had just given up. But it wasn't to be. He had kept coming no matter what Sasuke did to end his pursuit. So the Avenger put him down. It wasn't easy, he didn't expect it to be. But he managed to do it. And in the moments after, he was disappointed by the fact that he still hadn't awakened the eyes his brother spoke of. Moving from the bed, the genin decided to check himself out of the hospital. He had training to do and a lot of it. After his ill-fated meeting with Itachi, he had desired to find out exactly what the jutsu his brother had placed on him was. His research into the Sharingan led him to realize that Itachi's jutsu would strip Orochimaru's mind from his soul and give the younger Uchiha all of the legendary missing ninja's powers. The boy had learned so much trying to figure out what his brother had done to him. All he could find on the matter was theoretical concepts on the application of the Sharingan in non-combat situations. He wouldn't have read any of it otherwise. That had been how the Uchiha managed to put his teammate's inner beast asleep. Whatever that monster was, it couldn't have actually been the Kyuubi, right? As Sasuke made his way to the door, however, it burst open and the guard from outside raised his hands for a jutsu. Sasuke could understand having a guard. It was only a precaution to keep the Sharingan safe. But why was said guard suppressing his chakra? Uchiha Sasuke, if you attempt to escape I will be forced to put you under sedation. Escape? From what? What do you mean? I'm a shinobi of the leaf. You have no right to hold me here. Without answering the boy's question, the guard gestured toward the bed. You will remain in the bed until the Hokage has cleared you to be transferred to a holding cell. If you wish for food or drink, I will request it from the orderlies and oversee your meal. Have my guardians informed of where I am, and tell them I wish to know what's going on. I want to speak to them as soon as they are available. That's right, he'd left the village. They needed to give him some kind of slap on the wrist. At least he was going to be imprisoned in the hospital for now. He'd find a way to get the charges dropped when the old bats got here to bail him out. After confirming the request, Sasuke lay back on the bed and focused on what he had learned during the transfer. It seemed he knew much more about the war and jutsu, but he couldn't seem to bring anything solid or specific to mind. Deciding it must be the chakra suppressant interfering with his Sharingan, the exhausted teen rolled over to wait in much-needed sleep. Tsunade exited the operation room for another sleep session. She needed rest. The ceaseless work she had been doing to keep him alive took all of her focus and most of her chakra. Forcing herself to her limits near endlessly drained her to the bone. She had given up her image of youth within the first hour of surgery for the additional chakra, and for these days since, she hadn't bothered to replace it. She was also siphoning chakra from her reserve seal just to have the volume it took to perform the constant flow of medical jutsu. Her several volunteer chakra batteries could only provide so much before needing to rest, not that she lacked volunteers, but the only ones whose donations would help had to be from the available Jonin and Upper Chunin pool, or they would be drained to exhaustion before their donation could make much difference. But it wouldn't be enough to keep going non-stop. There was also her mental capabilities to keep sharp. Even the tiniest of mistakes could blow into a disaster, setting the operation back by hours or even days. And she couldn't afford to wear herself down like that. Instead, she had others take the table when she left. They were supervised by Shizune, and would do what they could to keep him stable as she rested. After about 4 to 6 hours she would go back and continue. She had needed to do this many times, and each time was put off as long as possible. It had taken so long, almost 9 days of non-stop healing just to ensure he'd remain stable for one of these breaks. The weary old woman knew her limits had been reached. She only hoped the boy who called her granny would continue to disrespect her after tomorrow. If not, she couldn't let it happen again. She would never let what happened to Dan repeat itself. He wasn't healing on his own as he used to either. Oh, he still healed faster than normal, but the Kyuubi was gone. Not a trace of it left, it seemed. In fact, that may have been the reason the others worked so hard on him. It was no longer there. Although the Sannin could sense the presence of its chakra, but the chakra itself was gone. And most of the others couldn't even sense the seal that held it. They might not have even known who he was, not that he was even recognizable when he came in. She knew some of the nurses who did recognize him had thought that it had died, and the poor boy was free of the thing. One had even suggested changing his name after all this and having him adopted. Dropping onto her bed, the Godem considered her next dilemma. After tomorrow's healing she had a mess to deal with over the Uchiha. The moment she had heard he was awake she had given an isolation order and forbidden anyone other than her assigned guard to even see him. As well as a sedative active order, so that should he use any chakra at all, even just activating his Sharingan, he would be put to sleep until she gave the waking order. One thing Tsunade knew for absolute certain, if Naruto didn't make it, neither would the Uchiha, trails and law be damned. The council was gathered and ready for the proceedings. Needless to say that since the traitor lasted this long Naruto had pulled through. After 2 weeks of her best work, Naruto was fully stable. Although he had yet to wake, and probably wouldn't for a few days. And while she attended this, she had her best and most violent guarding him. And alongside Anko and Ibiki, was an entire army of her most trusted. Kakashi had wanted to be there but he was also charged with testifying against Sasuke. Bring him in. Uchiha Sasuke wasn't dragged in. Instead he walked, in a dejected yet confident manner. She would have to fix that. We are here to discuss the actions of Uchiha Sasuke. It has come to our attention that the prodigy of the Uchiha has successfully assassinated the traitor Orochimaru of the Sannin. The one who had interrupted her was not Danzo as she had expected but instead it was her sensei's teammate Kaharu Utatane. What the hell do you mean assassination? Lady Hokage, Homura Mitokado explained. We were informed directly from Sasuke himself of his secret mission to act as bait and trap in order to assassinate Orochimaru. Most of the council had now began looking at the traitor Genin as if he really were a hero. She though was furious. She had placed an isolation order and it had not been kept. Utilizing an old jutsu of the Uchiha, young Sasuke erased Orochimaru from this dimension. And during this mission he proved himself more than capable of performing as a shinobi of the leaf. It is our request that he be raised from the rank of Genin to the rank of Chunin until such time that he has taken the Jonin exam as well. This shall give him more opportunity to train in the various arts his Sharingan has reclaimed from the traitor Sannin. She hadn't even had a chance to charge him with anything. Instead the council had voted and his promotion passed. Only the parents of those on the retrieval mission had voted against it. She couldn't wrap her mind around what had just happened. Sure, the Sannin understood that the council had the authority to make decisions like this. It was one of the few reasons the third Hokage hadn't retired long before he passed. The workload had just been too much for him, so he delegated. And on paper it made sense. But here, now, it was like seeing the world flipped upside down. His gag order had been lifted and he was issued a training pass to learn all of the village's public shinobi jutsu. Those jutsu that were not forbidden between the ranks A, B, and C. By this time Tsunade had realized that he had just gotten away with everything he'd done. But she could at least restrain him and keep him out on missions until she had a way to get around this. And she would get around it, she would wipe the Sharingan off the face of the earth for this. Accepting their decision was hard, acknowledging it was not impossible. Only just barely not. Then, the two elders finished their little usurping with one last issue. One that chilled her to the bone. Onto the final matter of the Uchiha's training, we understand that Uzumaki Naruto has survived his attempted murder of Uchiha Sasuke, and we believe it is time that he is dealt with. They didn't even flinch when her fury washed over them. Murder. Only Sasuke's slight paling was any indication that her killing intent was having any affect at all. During Sasuke's fight to defend himself, Uzumaki accessed the power of the beast within him. At this many of the civilians shouted for his death and some of the shinobi had grown pale as well. And Tsunade decided that she would murder the elderly teammates of her old sensei. It was at this time that Uchiha Sasuke, our village's hero, discovered his greatest ability. They paused and let the silence build. The Sharingan has allowed him to not only suppress the beast, but he believes it would also give him dominion over the demon's chakra. One moment it was silent, the next there were cheers for the traitor Genin. She was shaking with rage and on the verge of simply killing all three of them right there. It is time the demon be used as a weapon, Danzo interjected, therefore, I issue the motion that the Kyuubi be extracted from Uzumaki and turned over to the one who can control it. And she could hold back no longer. An extraction would kill him. Tsunade shouted, slamming her fist down to break the dais. Only to be met with shouts of punishment for his crimes from the civilians. And with an order from Danzo they went silent. The Uchiha stood rigid and silent, his eyes as wide as they would go. We must do this as civilized as we are able. The Hokage has the ability to restrain her anger at you sniveling cowards, so you should be at least able to conduct yourselves as a council rather than a mob. It was drawn to a vote. And 3 civilians voted against it, as well as the majority of the shinobi. They weren't just voting to save Naruto, but some voted because they didn't want to mess with the seal, or out of fear of freeing the beast. Tsunade was saved, she wasn't sure what she would do if they had voted against him. However, she also knew that sooner or later they would find a way. As she left the council chambers she decided she needed to plan for it. And in the next 3 days she had begun setting it up. She had searched for ways and means through the laws, and had prepared many orders to issue. It was only 3 days after the vote that Tsunade received the first sign that no laws would save her grandson. A death report arrived, informing her that a member of the civilian council had been assassinated, one of the 3 civilians that had voted against the extraction. She instantly ordered the other 2 under Anbu watch. Shortly later, receiving word that one of those 2 had all but publicly agreed to change his vote, probably due to threats to his family. The other was taken into protective custody and would be guarded for now. The Hokage had no choice, but to accept that the danger would remain. Sooner or later, they would find a way to get what they wanted. There was no way to keep Naruto safe in the village. As long as he remained in the village, her grandson would have no chance to escape when the time came. And if she had to send him away to keep him safe, she was leaving too. It had been 5 days since the vote, and the Godem Hokage was ready to admit it. She needed help. Only 2 days ago, one of the 3 civilian council members who had voted to keep Naruto alive had died. It looked like an accident, but there was no doubt in anyone's mind what had really happened. Then the day after, the second one made it known he was going to change his vote. The third was placed in Anbu protection within the hour of Tsunade learning about the other 2. However, his vote was no longer needed to sway anything. He had been forcibly resigned from the office he had held, and was now no longer a member of the village council. Tsunade paced in her office as she began to plan. There were no other options. By the next council meeting her grandson would be out of allies and they would move to extract the demon out of him. The ever-powerful Sannin had considered just killing them off, or using other means of brute force to avert this. And if they had voted back then to kill Naruto, she likely wouldn't have given it a second thought. She'd have simply started smashing until the vote was changed, or she was subdued. But she couldn't. That would get them both labeled as missing ninja, and all the support she had from the daimyo would crumble. Oh, she would kill them all if it ever reached that point. She was ready for that life. But he wasn't. He still wanted to be the Hokage of all things. Oh Kami. It was going to crush Naruto when he found out what the village council wanted to do. She needed to think this over. She needed to get this right. She had to save him. She knew she had less than a month to save Naruto. They would probably use the death of one of the civilians as a measure to hold the next meeting sooner. But not sooner than 3 weeks after the last one. She had a definite 2 weeks left. However long it took for them to get the next meeting levied after those 2 weeks, would be how long they had to keep running. If they were going to leave, they had to be prepared for the eventual pursuits. She needed to find allies for this. She needed to plan, such as who she would take with them. Who could she trust? Who could she put in that kind of fate? What supplies would she need? What could she grab? Tsunade knew she'd be taking Shizune and Naruto. Otherwise fleeing the village would be pointless. But she also wanted some extra muscle. She couldn't keep watch over him all the time. And, if the village sent someone to retrieve them, they only really needed to kidnap him. No, the Hokage needed help. She needed allies. She needed, the buxom woman realized with a grimace, to speak with a pervert. 4. That's how many Jonin were put in charge of guarding the boy. He understood why he was here. He understood why Shizune was here, with her little slug tag along, riding her shoulder. As the medical Sanin's apprentice she was best suited for caring for the boy. And he also understood why Ibiki-sama was here. In case the boy woke up, he would be needed to debrief the boy before anything influenced him. But why? The Anbu codenamed Tenzo asked himself. Why was she here? The object of his desire, or no, not that. The object of his annoyance, yes that. Anyway, she was currently opening and closing her legs, and from her angle, sitting on the floor of the hallway they occupied, she was giving him a full view, boldly showing him that she had nothing under the skirt she wore. She appeared to just be killing time, not even looking directly at his hidden form. Almost as if she wasn't aware of what she was doing, but he knew she knew exactly what she was doing to him. Her grin widened as he shifted uncomfortably behind his mask. Not just the Anbu issue face mask, but the mask of genjutsu and emotional training that was meant to keep all Anbu focused during a mission. The fact that she knew exactly where he was under his genjutsu was not that hard to understand. She was a Jonin, but the fact that she only did this when others were occupied told him she was doing it on purpose. She was teasing him. The boy had begun shifting in his sleep almost 20 minutes ago, and both Ibiki and Shizune had been in his room ever since. Giving her that whole time to make him feel awkward. His composure was about to break. All thoughts of his current discomfort fled as he rushed into the medical bay. The pulse of demon chakra was small. Only an active sensor would have been able to detect it outside of the wing they were in. But his enhancements made it easy for him to feel it. Mitarashi Anko followed right behind him. Naruto stood at the cage. It had been almost empty. The only solid thing he could see in it was a wall of shadow. Darkness. Naruto thought about going in there to find the damn fox, but he was scared. Not that the fox would hurt him, or that he would get lost in the dark. No, Naruto was scared that if he went in there, he would find the fox dead or missing. He didn't know how or why or even when, but knowing the fox had been inside him all his life made him feel safer. Just a little bit. It was nice, knowing that someone was always there. Even if they didn't like each other, the beast had been inside him from his birth. Naruto couldn't even begin to understand just how much that knowledge had meant to him. Finally mustering the courage, the blonde entered the seal. It seemed like an eternity of walking in the darkness that consumed him. But finally, he found what he was looking for. A slight illumination surrounded the occupant of the darkness, as he lay on a floor made of water. The great demon fox with 9 tails was a shivering and bleeding mess. His bleeding red chakra dripping off of him to swirl and mix with the blue waters he lay on. It was almost like real blood. Most of its chakra had been used up. How and when it was cleaned out, Naruto didn't know. But the fox was almost a third of his normal size. So much smaller now that Naruto thought he was only about twice the size of a horse. And he had woken up. Naru, Ian. The unsteady fox winced as he tried to rise, falling back to the pool of red and blue swirling waters. A ripple spread from the impact and passed under Naruto's feet. Instead of walking, the fox whimpered while crawling towards him. The deep rents in his fur and deeper were more visible as the bleeding chakra beast got closer. I tried. I tried to fight it, I wanted to help. Naruto, I'm so sorry. Its voice was a rasp, faint and harsh. Not knowing what else to do, the genin did what he would have for anyone else who came weeping up to him, bleeding and begging for forgiveness. He rushed up to the furry giant and hugged him, whispering that it was okay. When they had finished calming down, Naruto needed to know what happened. He explained to the fox that the last thing he remembered was reaching the base. He couldn't even remember if he made it inside or not. The Uchiha, he did this, just like Madara, and just like that other one. Through their dojutsu they were able to force me to obey. I fought it. He wasn't as powerful as the other two were. But it didn't matter, all my struggling did was cause me damage, until I couldn't fight back. Now Naruto understood. Sasuke had entered his mind and hurt the Kyuubi. He had beaten the fox down until the fox passed out. Wait, other two? Who else has done this? And though he didn't ask it, Naruto wondered why if they could do this, that none of them stopped the fox when he attacked. There were bunches of Uchiha back then and not one of them had stopped the fox. The Kyuubi whispered his response, almost as if he was ashamed. I was enslaved by Uchiha Madara before your village was made, and ensnared again, when my last host died, by the Uchiha who killed her. Both times, I was set upon the Leaf Village as a weapon without any will of my own to do so. That revelation hit Naruto like learning of the Kyuubi's seal had hit him. It shook his world, and Uchiha had been the one to attack the village. And the fox wasn't given any choice. He was locked up in a jail for something he had no control over. Suddenly all of Naruto's resentment and anger towards the fox vanished. Looking at the beast now. His matted fur stained and greasy by his own form of blood. Torn apart by his own attempts to break free of the dojutsu that controlled him. The fox was weak, and hurt. And alone, hugging the demon even tighter, Naruto whispered. Don't worry, I'll never let Sasuke hurt you again. His return to the world of the waking was long and slow, but eventually Naruto found his way back. His body seemed to be healing much better now that the fox had woken up. He could still feel his insides shifting here and there as the fox completed the work done by the medics. Naruto was fully aware of all the damage he had taken, and the fox had been able to tell him all of the work they had done to keep him alive. Even when suppressed into a sleep-like state, the fox had been aware of his body being torn open and sewn up from the inside out. But that was all he knew. He had no idea how long he'd been under. Or what had happened with the mission or his friends or anything else. It was time for him to get back up again. He blinked away the light of the room, and allowed his vision to clear. What he saw, however, caught him completely unprepared to face the horrors of this life. The genin woke to the sight of his worst nightmare. An official posting, stamped by the Hokage herself and sealed by the council, was stapled to the ceiling. From this point henceforth, it is decreed that all forms of noodle and broth meals are hereby banned from the village of Konoha. Any persons discovered preparing, serving or owning any form of this meal will be charged with treason of the first degree, and punished with imprisonment and public corporal disciplinary action. It was an edict decreeing all ramen and ramen-like foods were banned from the Leaf Village. Giving his natural response to such an edict, drew the people from out in the hall into his room. One of them being an extremely evil snake, who was currently rolling on the floor giggling something about, higher than a girl's. Uzumaki-san, are you injured? The formal words of concern came from an Anbu who performed a quick search of the room looking for an attacker. Naruto, are you okay? What happened? This much more welcome voice was Shizune, who he guessed had been sitting in the bedside chair since before he had even woken up. She quickly reached over to check him for medical issues. He wanted to tell them he was fine but the words weren't coming, so all he could do was glare at Anko and point at the ceiling. Looking up, Shizune flinched. She obviously had no idea that it had been there. A quick hop and the medic had snatched the paper from the ceiling. With a small growl she walked over and smacked the still giggling woman on the head with it as she took the fake decree to the trash. Reassuring him that it was indeed fake, took several minutes, laced with glares at the culprit. After that had been settled, and Naruto had been given a quick examination. She asked him some basic questions to ensure he was fully awake and aware. Almost as soon as she finished, the scarhead guy from the exam walked in and cleared them out. Shizune only gave a short goodbye before racing out the door. while Mr. Anbu stood to one side of the exit in the hall. The evil one went out the window. Ibiki introduced himself as the head of the interrogations department as he placed the chair perpendicular to the bed. Uzumaki Naruto, the Hokage is currently indisposed and has left your debriefing up to me. The details of your mission are not to be colored or altered in the slightest. I would appreciate your full cooperation. Oi, before that, how are the others? How long have I been out? And what happened to Uchiha Teme? They had the head of mind-fucking people here to debrief him? Why? I am not at liberty to discuss the other members of your mission with you at the moment. But as a courtesy, I will inform you that there were no casualties and all members of the team, as well as the target of your mission, are back within the village. Well, at least he told him that much. Might as well get it over with. So he gave the man his story of the events, not even trying to hide that he drew out the fox and that he had used its power to fight Sasuke. But as he mentioned what Sasuke did, Ibiki began to fret. Naruto neglected to explain that he only knew as much about it because the fox told him. After hearing what he had to say, the Jonin stood and paced, obviously worried about something Naruto had said. It was his turn to ask some questions. And so the interrogator dropped back into the chair to explain. It seemed that he had been out for about 21 days, it was 23 days since the mission had been issued. And shortly after he began stirring, Naruto had released a minuscule amount of the fox's chakra. That pulse had been 2 hours before he actually woke up. The host didn't mention it, but he was almost certain that had been when Kyuubi had tried to stand. It had taken 13 days of Tsunade's work to keep him alive. And for 8 days afterwards he had been in a coma. It didn't take Shizune long to find her master. The woman was naturally still in the archives of the village's laws. Attempting to find a method of preventing the village council from extracting the Kyuubi was her top priority now that Naruto-kun was stable. Tsunade had been in there more than any other place in the village in the past few days. Stacks upon stacks of laws had been piled around her. All of them about one thing or another, but none of them even related to what she was actually reading. There were laws on clans and laws on the council and how the council had slowly usurped the third's legal powers. Her master had read all of these already but had stacked them around her as if for reference in order to hide what she was truly reading. A statute on releasing a shinobi from their bonds with the village. Telling the woman of Naruto's condition should have warranted joy or relief. Instead Tsunade tensed as if only realizing a job she had to do. Her breathing quickened and her face paled. He can't leave. Keep him in his room and don't let anyone in there. Tsunade's voice was saturated in fear and despair. You must not allow him to find out about the meeting or what they planned on doing. Understand. Understanding did come, and with it came fear and pity. How would Naruto take it? He would have gladly died to protect this village. But now he was being targeted out of spite. What should I tell him? What can I tell him? Oh Kami. Sensei, this will kill him. Calming down ever slightly, Tsunade moved to grasp her student's shoulders. We tell him nothing. We keep him in his room until I am ready to explain. It would have been better if he could have slept for a few more days. I can't be there for him right now, I have to find a way out. Inform the security detail of this situation, find another couple masks we can trust and have them join the roster. Just, let me know who they are before you contact them. Okay? Nodding her compliance, Shizune took off running again. She had to make it there before Ibiki-sama was finished debriefing Naruto. If one of them let slip about the vote, then all hell could break loose. Tsunade knew she had no other options. Now that he was awake she needed to speak with her teammate now. Not when he arrived for a check-in, and not when he decided to try researching her for his next book. Packing away what she had been reading, the Sannin practically fled to her room in the Senju compound. It took her time to find it, but she dug through all her old possessions with a fury and vigor that the hermit would have loved to see her use when searching for the very item that she was searching for. To think she would actually be looking for it as if her life depended on it. That scroll was one of the few things he had given her that she kept. Although his reason to give it to her was vastly different than why she used it now, Tsunade was certain he would understand. If he didn't she would just castrate him and then explain what was happening. Once she had found the scroll the Sannin sprinted to the Senju dojo, activating the privacy seals once she made it inside. Biting her thumb she opened the scroll and drew a line of blood across it. A few hand seals were made and the summons was complete. Before her sat a toad far larger than he had been when she had first met him. A toad that had a personal contract to her, as arranged by Jiraiya, so she could call on the pervert if she ever decided to sleep with him again. She hadn't known why she kept it, but she had. She had almost thrown it out so many times but for some reason never could. Yama-kun, I need to speak with your boss as soon as he can get here. Tell him Naruto's life hangs by a noose, the leaves are ready to burn. Tossing the toad a bottle of her secret sake she kept hidden from Shizune, Tsunade dropped to the floor in relief. The toad had vanished without a word when she told him that phrase. I hang by a noose, and the blossoms are ready to burn, was a quote from one of his perverse novels. When the woman shouted out to the hero that her life would be ended by her own clan if he did not come to save her. The blossoms were the symbol of the clan in his story. When replaced by leaves for her use, it would let him know, without revealing to any who might even yet be listening, that the village was the enemy. Not that she read them. Okay, so maybe she had. But she wanted to know if he was any good. The series had been a huge hit. So naturally she had wanted to find out what all the hype was. Besides, this was the only way she could think of to get him here without blowing cover. His presence in the village must never be learned of if she was going to pull this off. All the planning she had worked so feverishly on depended on his cooperation and on their schemes not being discovered until it was too late. After the head scar guy left, the others came back in. Shizune took her seat next to his bed and everybody hushed. There was something going on here. Naruto, I'm going to assume that you want to hear what happened to your friends, right? The other guy had said they were all okay, so what was the big tension about? Course I want to hear about them, Shizune. Nay. Just tell me already. Okay Naruto, she smiled a little more relaxed. The mission was a success, outside of you there were no major injuries. Choji-kun did have a mild poisoning in his system but that was easily reversed. I'm actually the one who did that. She gave a nervous giggle. Anyway, when you were discovered, you were hurt so badly, your sensei actually ruptured every muscle in his legs, racing back to get you seen in time. We also had no idea what Orochimaru had done to Sasuke. Naruto was still worried about his teammate. Had he been devoured by the evil Sannin? Don't worry, Sasuke is safe and normal. He was, in a coma for a while, but Orochimaru's attempt to steal his body failed completely. Well, can I see? Naruto began the inevitable discussion that had them all so worried. I'm sorry Naruto, Shizune interrupted the boy. She didn't have the willpower to drag it out, she had to just break it to him. I'm sorry, but you must be confined to this room for at least another week. After all of your injuries we simply can't take a chance that you might have a medical issue outside of this room. What? But Shizune, I can't stay here for another week. I'm sorry, but that's Tsunade's orders and if you attempt to break those orders then you will be restrained. Neko-chan here was recently promoted to Anbu Commander. And I assure you she is very capable of restraining you with little to no risk to your health. Holy shit. They actually put the Anbu commander here to watch him. First it was the boss of mind-fucking people and now it was the boss of the assassination corps to babysit him? What the hell was going on? Before he could ask if they could visit him, the medical apprentice told her almost little brother the next step of his worst medical treatment. He was denied any visitors outside of herself or Hokage-sama or the ones who had been enlisted to guard him. That included herself, the two Anbu, his sensei, and the evil one. They were the only people he would get to see for the next week. When the helpless genin objected to the evil one being part of the group he was again assaulted by her giggling mockery. Ah, you poor prepubescent little manly boy. Would it get too hard to stay in the same room as such a white gal like me overnight? Both of the Anbu stepped between him and her. And Shizune who was blushing like mad gave a cool reply. Not at all Anko-chan. You will be here during the daytime and Neko-chan will make absolutely certain you don't do anything the Hokage would kill you for. Tsunade waited in the Senju dojo for almost an hour before he arrived. And it wasn't in some ridiculous pose shouting from the rooftops. Nor was it in a quiet murmur or perverse grope that caught her off guard. No, it was a small knock that she had assumed meant someone had been sent to find her by the village. Too light to be Shizune, probably a genin. Standing she moved to the dojo entrance and focused her chakra in order to feel out the presence. It wasn't a genin. In fact it appeared to be a civilian. Opening the door, the Hokage glared at the elderly man in front of her. Hello Heim. It didn't look like him, but who else would simply wave at her with that kind of greeting? The elderly man was poor of dress and of health, it would seem, and of course coming to the medical sage was only natural of someone like that. He hid himself well. Closing them both in, she allowed her teammate to place his own sealed tags around them. Waiting. So, the leaves? Are you sure? Yes, the fire has already been lit. He was taking his sweet time activating those damn seals. With a small grin, the pervert turned to her, and though I fast of wealth or fame. Damn it, she didn't need to play any more games, that wasn't even from the same book. Did he think she could remember every line of his series? That's enough. I think we should focus on the real issue here. Yuna, I fast of wealth or fame. He actually wagged his finger at her. Obviously he wasn't going to activate the seals until his sick pleasure had been had. I feast on life and love. Unto your beauty mine eyes shall sway, my heart shall quicken, and my temper shall melt. I shall fast of all but of you, and be more satisfied than the daimyo of the greatest bounty of the heavens. With her words the entire dojo lit up in one of the most complex sealing arrays she had ever seen. Even the one in the Hokage's office was nothing compared to this. I keyed it to you, so you had to be the one to say it. The old man was gone, and a slightly less old shinobi was in his place. Not even getting into the argument Shisu badly wanted, Tsunade brushed his giggles aside for the more important issue. We're leaving Konoha. The council wants to extract the Biju from Naruto's seal. I've already looked, and it seems Sensei signed over almost half the legal powers of the hat to the elder and village councils. There is no way around it. No legal actions we can take to prevent. We could always just kill the Uchiha boy. He interrupted her. Sure, that pissed her off, but who had even mentioned the Uchiha? Look, Suheim, the kid is already rotten as it is. He'll be corrupted the moment they put that thing inside him. Besides that, between his life and Naruto's there isn't any option. I can take the blame if you need me to. Hell, I'll actually do it, and publicly if it helps. He was serious. Her teammate would outright murder the Uchiha in cold blood if it meant protecting his student's son. Kami, she had to tell him. It was time that he knew exactly who the boy really was. It would be pretty easy to portray actually. The Toad Sage continued, completely unaware of her newest inner dilemma. Given what he did to the child of my most precious student, and all you would need to do is release his heritage. I already have the documents filed and placed in your desk drawer. All you need is to summon Asuma, Shikaku, Hiyashi and Azuki to be there. That brought her out of her mental battle. If she did that, he would be finding out anyway. And all she would need to do it was the signatures of those 3 major clan heads, and the recently promoted Anbu commander. Once they all sign, which you should have them do before actually telling them exactly what they're witnessing, then his heritage will all come out. Naruto will be the most favored child of the village overnight. It sounded like the last Sannin had already made up his mind and planned it all out before even talking to her. Gathering what little resolve she had left, she prepared to not only explain Naruto's true heritage but to also convince him that her way was for the best. If the Uchiha dies shortly after that, I can take full responsibility, and those who know about Naruto's condition will be outnumbered by those who only know that he's the 4th son. They'll simply accept that it was vengeance for my student's kid and that they won't be able to do anything about it. It's not like they'll actually make me a missing ninja. And you won't even be associated with it. Jiraiya, about that, his heritage. It's a lot deeper than you may think. After Nawaki, that time. Damn it, she needed to say it. Quit stammering, you stupid old bitch. Tsunade chastised herself. Again she was caught by an unexpected reaction from the sage. I know him. I know. He began, damn it, I know. After the old man passed, he didn't betray your trust. But he left clues. He's been leaving them ever since Minato was born. Tsunade was shocked. Why hadn't he mentioned anything? If he knew, then why was he so calm? Why not knock her senseless? Or at least find some way to get back at her for hiding it from him? For choosing to abandon her child, for choosing Dan over her own son. In his will he left me boxes of Minato's stuff, right down his first finger painting. And I think back to all the times he pushed me. Look at this potential, this genin would be most suited for you. I'll make time for you to be there for that chunin of yours. I'm naming your, and he almost told me right then, student, the next Hokage. The old shinobi sat, with his broken soul fully displayed. I never picked up on it. I thought, maybe he was just that good at reading people, but after Orochimaru, Well, I still didn't look at it because I was so sure it had been our time together that made Minato so like me. He looked at her now. Not angry or even hurt. Just defeated. I only figured it out after you found out, I guess. When I saw the difference in the way you looked at Naruto last time I was here. When you were told whose son he was. I know how angry I was to find out about my son. But I had time with him, hell, he even made Hokage. I couldn't be more proud as a father. For you, it must have been so horrible finding out that your grandson was here, alive all this time, and being treated the way he was. Tsunade didn't know what else to say. He fully understood her decision, or at least accepted it. I never understood why Sensei was so insistent that you not know about Naruto's parents until you returned to the village for good. Now I think I do. He was afraid you would storm the village to rescue your grandkid. I likely would have, and I still will if I have to. I'll destroy the village if necessary. And if I somehow can't save him, then the village won't exist by the time they kill me. I guess that explains Shimazu no Gai, right? You had just heard your son was dead, and some idiot laughs about the fox wiping out the leaf. Nodding her reply, Tsunade felt guilt overwhelm her. Over 100 died when that happened. And it was likely to repeat itself on a scale thousands of times larger if they couldn't solve this issue. We can't simply kill the Uchiha, it won't do any good. Maybe releasing Naruto's heritage will have some effect, but it's too late for us to remain. They voted to kill him. If he ever finds out, he'll be devastated. It took some arguing, but eventually he understood why it was a bad idea for them to remain in the village. There just wasn't anything they could do that would truly allow the village to recover in their eyes. How could Naruto be safe in a village like this? Her teammate admitted that he had wanted to remove the boy several times. And had even tried to when the kid was 2 years old. Right after a pair of academy students were told by a council member where to find him and a twisted version of what he was. He even decked the Sandame when the old man stopped him. That had resulted in a 5-year banishment from the village. Thanks to the old man, neither of them had been able to save their grandson. And neither of them knew who the boy truly was. When it came to breaking the news to Naruto though, Jiraiya put his foot down. For now, you don't tell him a single thing about it. When the time comes, tell him that you're going on a diplomatic mission, soon sedate him and smuggle him out. He learns of nothing before you're out of the village. They discussed what to take and whom. Tenzo would be a must. There was no way they could train Naruto to use that without the wood user. Jiraiya also told her to bring the Anbu commander, Azuki. And make sure she took all the BK ranked documents with her. K being the highest level, just above the unranked class. The ranks being E, which was almost unneeded, but they couldn't just teach floating a leaf to everyone. D, academy student to genin. C, genin to chunin hopeful. For most of these, sharing whatever they were with a civilian was punishable by a few months of imprisonment. B, no one under chunin was allowed to know. Unless of course, if they were clan secrets and officially by the clan of the one being told. Such as the caged bird sealing process. A, only the most trusted chunin were permitted to know these secrets. S, no one under jonin could be told. Or they and the person telling would be killed. SS, not even most jonin knew they existed. SSS, only the Anbu commander and cage-level shinobi such as Kakashi and the Sannin were aware of their actions. J, the Hokage, Jiraiya, and the Elder Council were the only 5 people in the village that knew of them. These were things like Naruto's parentage and the Uchiha event. U, or unranked, was just above that, but was only told to shinobi who weren't cleared to know the other ranks existed and could possibly require said shinobi being silenced once the mission was finished. K ranks, the only rank that even Jiraiya wasn't permitted to learn. These were located in the cage's black book. Only the cage and the Anbu commander were supposed to even know the book existed. The only reason he did, was so he could keep it away from Danzo should the man be selected. Tsunade also needed to know what all she would be taking, as in jutsu or documents, how much of the treasury she needed to take. They agreed on half, and the Hokage's personal jutsu library as well as the Forbidden Scroll. I know where to find all the Uzugakure and Namikaze stashes, and I'll even relocate the Uzumaki shrine to another plane for transport. Her teammate assured her, what you need to do is nab the Senju assets and swipe the Hokage Black Book. Try to grab as much of the other village assets as you can get your mitts on without being discovered while you're at it. Don't worry, I'm already writing out a list of everything I'm taking. They would be taking the village for all they could before this was over. Once you've done that, and gotten out, nominate me as your successor and I'll see what I can get myself. It hadn't taken much to get Jiraiya to accept that part of her plan. Once she agreed to leave Sensei's crystal ball for his research, her teammate had been all for becoming Hokage. And he had even agreed to make it difficult for them to find him without being obvious about it. She had other plans to that effect, but she wasn't going to spill all of them to him. It would be more convincing if he found out with the rest of them. Coming from one of the many bars she drank at that day, the busty Senju stumbled into the village clerk's office. Instead of the light tap required, the drunken shinobi flattened her palm on the desk, smashing the little bell underneath it. She looked around. Picking up the bell, she appeared to be wondering why it hadn't brought anyone out. Finally the head of the office came rushing out to greet the Hokage. And managed to just catch her before she chucked the bell at the wall. Explaining that they were already closing and asking her to come back was out of the question. She was the Hokage after all. So he assisted her personally as she demanded all of the Senju assets. Everything that was there and all the rest of her belongings. It took almost half an hour to gather it all up, and longer to get it all brought out. By that time, she appeared to actually be sobering up. It took her a moment to understand why he had brought all of her family's stuff out. But once she did, she went with it. And all who were there knew she was only following through, out of embarrassment. She had obviously lost all her cash at a bar somewhere. To keep up her appearances, she even asked him to send runners to the banks and collect all of her other assets. Then asked about a consolidation holdings. He was eager to accommodate. And with all of the Senju assets, aside from land properties, released and gathered, the Sannin sealed them all in a few scrolls and parted ways, leaving the clerks to believe she would be back once she'd gone through it all herself. Scrolls safely stowed, the Godem headed back to her compound. She would soon begin sealing everything she had there as well. As she left the financial district, she passed by one of the civilian council members and a gaggle of others following him. She almost did a double take when she saw that one of them was Hiyashi, the head of the Hyuga clan. His head was bowed and he avoided her gaze, as he followed the Hyuga elder who was taking an active part in whatever the group was discussing. The elder waved them off and quickly made his way towards her. Hiyashi followed behind him like a broken dog. "Hokage-sama, it is pleasant to see you out and socializing." That was naturally a reference to her display in a few of the bars she had frequented. It would soon get around that she had placed Naruto under medical arrest and locked him in his room at the hospital. Anyone who saw what she was up to would assume she had been getting drunk because she had given up and resigned herself to the council's will. It is rather unfortunate that the child has woken up. To know of his coming fate is perhaps worse and more cruel than the fate that comes. She could barely hold herself back from breaking that elder's spine. It would have been merciful of Kami to allow him to simply never wake up. As it stands with him awake now, he may have much more sympathy to his fate. With a sneer the elder turned and walked away. Having gotten no response from her, he would have assumed that the stink of sake she was doused in was her only concern. "Come Hiyashi, your girls must be waiting to be tucked in by now." The flash of rage on the clan head's face was almost missed. That was nice to know. While considering this tidbit of information she almost didn't see it, but the Hyuga figurehead mouthed an "I'm sorry" to her as they parted. So it seemed Hiyashi was the Hyuga elder's little bitch for a reason revolving around his daughters. Was there any way she could use that? Naruto had been expecting the Hokage to see him after a few hours. Or maybe that next morning. But of course she must have been hungover or something. It wasn't like she was his mom, so he kind of understood why she took so long to finally come see him. She wasn't used to all the work that the old man used to do. The third had always been there for Naruto when he was hurt. But sometime the afternoon of the second day he was awake in the hospital she finally came. Gaki. Her greeting was overly cheerful and somehow excited. Maybe she really was just that busy. Rushing into the room, the Sannin took her grandson in a life-squeezing, bone-cracking hug. Maybe it was the fact that he was actually her grandson, or maybe it was finally seeing him alive and well after that operation. But Tsunade was completely overwhelmed with relief and joy at being able to hold him as she was. Dropping him ungraciously back on the bed, the medical sage ripped off the top of his medical gown and began checking his vitals. Yanking his arm out, she felt his ribs near his heart. Pulsing her chakra through his system, she felt for anything that could be amiss. But it seemed the fox had been working overtime to get him back to health. Placing both her palms on his back, he focused on his lungs and heart. They had been almost completely destroyed when he was brought in, with only a single ventricle pumping his blood throughout his entire body. He was healthy, but he needed a reason to be held here. Not that she hadn't already prepared a truly good excuse. Shizune had already run all the other checks needed. Anything else would probably just tip him off. So turning him back to face her, she put on the best glare she could muster towards her little prince. Not that it was that good. Naruto, do you have any idea how close you came to dying? She scolded him like a little kid. What would I have done if you had died? Huh? I'm only supposed to be Hokage for a year or two before you are old enough to wear the hat, right? The genin nodded his head in terror. So what the hell were you thinking? I'm sorry, Ba-chan. I had to scare 30 years off my life. Gaki, I am not very young as it is. And you're costing me what years I have left. The incredulous look on his face as she used her age against him proved too much for her. He had always given her crap about being old, and for once it was biting him in the ass. With a sigh and a few chuckles, the Hokage sat in front of him. Naruto, all jokes aside, you're going to be here a while. We need to give you a full psych evaluation. The old hermit still has to check over your seal and find out what the hell happened to the fox. And to top it all off, we were using medical jutsu on you far longer than ever recorded. There is so much foreign chakra in your system that we can't even map out your network to make sure it's intact. Looking him in the eyes, the woman was ready to cry. Tears already forming. No one has ever been so badly damaged and come back, Naruto. You should be dead from what happened to you. You are never leaving this hospital until I know you won't ever do something like that again. The tears were flowing now. The genin was so confused, and worse, he was horrified that he had hurt her by letting himself be so beaten. Naruto had no idea what to say or do. This was Ba-chan, and she was bawling her eyes out. I'm sorry, Tsunade-sama. His word cut off as she pinched his cheek between her fingers. What the hell did you just call me? You call me Granny or Ba-chan or even Mommy if you want, but you do not call me that. She was just throwing him for every loop in the rope. Didn't she hate being called old? They kept talking for a while, and after things calmed down, the genin breached the subject of visitation and of discharge. But according to her, he would be in there for 2 weeks now. He needed to get all of their medical chakra out of his system, before they would be able to completely map his chakra network. And much like a muscle that was overused, his chakra network could be severely damaged. They needed to map that out and make sure his chakra pathways were healing. Apparently, after so much medical jutsu had been forced on his system to keep him alive, they had already been damaged to the point that if she couldn't do anything to repair them, he may have to drop out of the ninja program. And that was after the battle had already fried it. It was a very complicated process, but it did seem like the fox returning had begun to correct the issue. And the perv was going to take at least a week to get there to check up on his seal. After the Uchiha had messed with the fox, they needed to be absolutely certain the seal was fully intact. And that meant that he would be stuck here until Arrow Sannin cleared him. In the meantime, he had a psych evaluation. Basically, they wanted to know if the extreme injuries he had gone through had made him crazy. This was where he told the Godem in no uncertain terms, that if he was stuck here much longer, the boredom would drive him crazy. So in order to shut him up, the Sannin raised a single palm and formed the Rasengan. It wasn't that hard for me to do, once the pervert showed me the steps. I was able to master it in about 20 minutes. I am a Sannin for a reason, and a medical sage after that. My chakra control is vastly superior to even Jiraiya's. So she got out a bucket of water and some balloons. Right now, you are stuck here for a while. And you still need to use a clone in order to perform this jutsu. So what I'm going to have you do is train. Train in your worst area, which also happens to be the only area available at the moment. Thank Kami, the hermit knew how the boy thought. She simply gave him a job and he was ready to do it without any other distractions. Completely forgetting about his boredom, she instructed him to first pop the water balloon in both hands, then in his right hand and then in his left. And finished with a challenge, that if he completed that before the week was over he should try to pop it on his forehead. Unknown to the Hokage, her challenge had sparked another idea for the genin. One that came from the single time his sensei had actually taught him anything. The feet were the hardest place to control your chakra. If she said popping the balloon on his forehead would help him complete it one-handed, Then what if he could pop the water balloon there? Accepting the challenge, Naruto got to work. It would probably keep him occupied for a while. Gathered around them were the key members of the village council who had adjusted to their line of thought. The entire civilian council, and almost half of the shinobi council. A few, choice clan heads, had been left out. They only needed 2/3 of the council to make this work. As stated by the legal bill passed when the boy was enrolled in the academy, should the beast ever become a clear and present threat to the village, then the law passed on the day of his birth could be removed by a 2/3 vote. This included if he were to become a rogue ninja, or if he ever lost control. When the Sandaime agreed to the bill, it was as a measure to ensure they could explain how he was so dangerous to the newer shinobi who might meet him in battle. It was the simplest path the Hokage had been given towards appeasing their anger that he would place the demon in the shinobi academy in the first place. Arming a monster like that with their secret jutsu and skills was a mistake to be sure, but the old fool had been so insistent. Now that he had awoken, if he learned what their little vote had been about, then he would surely retaliate. Thus making him a threat. The vote was drawn and cast. Unanimous. Even the few shinobi who were there voted for it. Although she didn't quite appreciate it how the Anbu commander seemed to be laughing behind her mask. What of Danzo-sama? Are you sure you would approve of this? The concerned voice was that of her teammate Humura. Quite certain, he has been very supportive of our endeavor. Now, with this, all those who have lost their loved ones will be able to call out in vengeance towards the beast. Our support will be increased by the entire population of those who have reason to grieve. Nodding to her, he turned back to the gathered council. Go out, spread the word. Each of you will be given some copies of the official repealing of the Third's Law. Ensure that no one you tell speaks of it until they too have a copy. We don't need any martyrs to be created. Wind, cutting, howling, screaming, falling, not downwards but across the treetops. Pain, darkness, pain, screaming, pain, begging, pain, 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 silence, heat. She was trapped. She couldn't move anything. All that she felt was the burning pain radiating from her neck. The seal. Orochimaru surely would have used it to end her pain. She knew the price of failure. It had happened to others who had a seal. Those who failed to meet the master's desires were ended. Only the 5 of them had made it to the level of trust he placed in them. Each and every other one who were given the seal had died one way or another. Why hadn't the master killed her? It was only slightly possible he had died, or the soul transfer had failed. But that was the only reason she could think of as she lay there waiting for death. If he wasn't able to. Her body had been sliced repeatedly by the wind blades, and it appeared that her lower half had been crushed by the remains of the tree that had landed on her. Willing her arms to move hurt like hell, but she clawed at the tree trying desperately to either free herself or roll it the rest of the way over her so she could die. She had no idea how many times she had passed out from the pain. The only thing she knew was that she wasn't dead yet. Finally, after realizing her fingertips had been completely torn off by her struggles, she tried to use it. The mark on her back pulsed with pain and fire. It was as if each stroke of the angular lines her flesh was being seared into her flesh. Soon she could see their blocky, sharp-angled branches extending up her arms. It was her last hope to survive. She had to get out from under the tree. And so with the strength her curse and the fear of death granted her, she forced herself out. The tearing of her body was audible, but for those few moments as she was released, she felt nothing but burning pain from the seal. Her curse mark had actually began to smoke on her skin. Black charred strips of her flesh was all that was left of it as it faded, and her body's pain came back with vengeance. When she woke, the pain was less. Much less. What she felt now was thirst. Thirst. She was so dry she would die of dehydration soon. She could almost smell the water nearby. Pulling herself towards the sky, she climbed into the clouds. She could fly, she thought to herself. Then her fingers shrieked in pain. Her surroundings came back to her. She had been dreaming or something. What was wrong with her hand? It felt, looking forward, the delirious Otto Nen saw her wrist disappearing into something. Water. She had no idea how she had arrived at the water, nor how long she had been lying in the woods. But she was thirsty, so she drank. She plunged her head into the water, and swallowed as much as she could. And the pain returned. Each time she drank, the pain came back and she would pass out. But before she could let herself die of dehydration, the thirst drove her back to the water. She had no idea how long she was out there, or what would happen to her, but when she woke, her body was dry and she was weak. She barely had the strength to move her head to the water. She had lost count of how many times she had tried to not drink it. She wanted to die, to end the pain. But she couldn't resist the thirst. 8 times, that was how many times Sasuke had used the Chidori. How many holes he had opened up in his best friend. He had ripped open Naruto's gut and incinerated the contents. He had burned everything that was left of the idiot into a charred and mangled pile of slime. And he was still alive. At least this explained why he had yet to unlock the Mangekyo. He hadn't actually killed him. Finding out that the beast inside Naruto actually was the Kyuubi had been a shock beyond compare. It was almost as big a shock as coming home to find his family dead had been. His guardians, the 2 elders, had been insistent that he only learned of it from the fight. He could never reveal to anyone that they had been the ones to explain it. Having agreed with their cover story about the assassination mission, he allowed them to take the lead as they entered the council chamber. They assured him it would hold up against any legal examination. He had been promoted to Chunin, just as they had predicted. Then, they made that vote. After all the work the Hokage had done to keep Naruto alive. Sasuke never thought she would allow his fate to be cast in a vote. The Uchiha began to pale and hyperventilate. It was as if the guilt of what he had done was washing over him all over again. They were going to kill him. Sasuke couldn't accept that. Okay, yes, he had already tried to kill Naruto himself. But it wasn't fair. Naruto had survived. He had lived through everything that Sasuke had done to him. He deserved to live. Sasuke moved to speak, to refuse, to say he wouldn't be a part of it. But his jaw locked and his body froze. He couldn't move. The Uchiha struggled against his own flesh, but he was trapped. No longer able to even blink. The vote was cast and a small drop of his tension faded. As he was led away, he let his tears fall. Relief washed over him. They had voted to save his teammate. Once they had returned to his room in the hospital, whatever they had done stopped. His body was his own again. The moment he could move, the Uchiha turned on his guardians, screaming the way he hadn't since he was a child arguing with his brother. What the hell were you doing? I was trapped. Why couldn't I move? His voice easily could have carried down the hall, however the seals placed on the room while he was imprisoned prevented it. Sasuke-chan, calm yourself, there is no nay. The hell there isn't, G-san. What the fuck is wrong with you? Humura actually flinched at his voice. How could you let them try to do that? Naruto was trying to stop me, not kill me. I don't care what he has in him. You can't just vote to kill. His body locked up once more, and he looked to his guardians as they moved out of the doorway. The opening door revealed the crippled old bastard who had called for the vote. Danzo, the Hokage's secret rival, the man that these 2 idiots met with at least once a week to receive their orders. What we did to prevent your movement was done in case it was Orochimaru who controlled your body when you woke. The elder closed the door and activated the privacy seals that Sasuke had thought were already working. Oops, it is a small seal that was placed during your coma. I would have considered removing it, however your little tantrum has convinced me it is still necessary. Danzo, you should have warned us that you were using it. We could have prepared better to soothe his pride. The woman turned towards the crippled elder and swatted the top of his head with a hand fan produced from her sleeve. The scared-up elder's only reaction was a slight twitch in his single visible eye. Suddenly Sasuke's body went limp as the binding seal released. Why would you want to kill Naruto? I don't want anything to do with it. That is unfortunate, because you have no choice in the matter. It is for the good of the village that your Sharingan be in control of the demon residing in that boy. And more than that, I plan to keep him alive as long as possible after the extraction so that you can deal the finishing blow and unlock your final Sharingan. The Uchiha was shocked to say the least. How did the elder even know about that? Voicing his question resulted in the elder's bandages unraveling to reveal a gauntlet which also dropped to the floor in a matter of moments. What Sasuke saw underneath was disgusting. In the elder's arm were at least a dozen implanted Sharingan. I know about it, because I am the one who fought him off the last 4 times he tried to test you. Last 4. It was less of a shock than the arm, but to know that Itachi had attacked before made him begin to feel sick. Until you met him this last time, we thought he had been trying to kill you. It was only from the Sanin's testimony that he had mentioned testing you, that we realized the difference. So he had done this to defend him? His arm was covered in stolen eyes ripped out of the heads of his family members. I sacrificed half of my body in order to keep you safe, and I have faced his higher dojutsu several times doing so. If you were to unlock it, your control over the beast would be absolute." The elder leaned in his bandaged face, coming almost eye to eye with the teen. "You would finally have the power you need to kill him. With the fox under your command, he wouldn't be able to match your brute force. No skill or jutsu can compare to the might of the Kyuubi." Sasuke wasn't sure why, but he knew that he had been convinced. He was willing to kill his best friend before, this wasn't much different. And all the difference was in the favor of killing him. Now that you have Orochimaru's own knowledge and capabilities added to that, you will be the ultimate weapon this village has ever possessed. The Serpent Sannin, using the higher Sharingan and controlling the greatest Biju. You will be the greatest force any of the villages have ever seen, and the leaf will crush all who oppose her." The elder finished his speech and stepped back. Sasuke no longer cared what the man had done to his arm. It was a sacrifice to fight Itachi. And now Sasuke had to make a sacrifice of his own. It was a deep sacrifice, but Naruto's death was more than worth it, to kill him. It was announced ever so gently that Naruto was the fox. At first it was the few members of the council and the Anbu commander who spoke of it. But that night the council members went to their trusted allies, neighbors, and friends. The clan heads had the information passed along channels through their clans until all the major parties in their clans had been informed. And they were all told specifically not to react in any way. The next morning Izuki Yugo, Anbu commander, called a general assembly of all Anbu and Jonin within the village. The Anbu and the Jonin already knew. Even if they hadn't known about it already, once joining either of the two groups a shinobi was made aware of it. During the general assembly they were given an intensive course on how the seal was meant to operate. This included boxes of pamphlets, with a copy of the repealed law on the back of each. With the details given to them, the Anbu began to seek out the Chunin assigned to them and begin teaching classes on all things. Naruto is not the Kyuubi. Starting with the seal and how seals work and moving on to legacies and how the boy acted. At the same time the Jonin dispersed amongst the genin population. Those who had students told theirs what the Hokage wanted them to know. The others began giving similar classes to what the Anbu were giving. Just dumbed down. They ensured that the genin were all completely convinced that Naruto was the victim of the fourth sacrifice. When inevitably anyone would ask why. Why him? Why were they telling them? Why now? The answer was always the reasons behind his selection will be announced in due time, but we are telling you shinobi because with the death of the Sandame, the civilian element in the village council has declassified the information, and it is their job to protect the village assets. At the end of it all, each of them were given copies of photos taken from the mission to retrieve the Uchiha, and all the damage that Naruto had taken to complete his mission. Which according to the file he actually had. The official mission was to retrieve a kidnapped Sasuke, and save him from the evil Sannin. It didn't mention who had done the damage to him, nor did it mention the fact that the Uchiha had left purposely. According to the file Sasuke had been unconscious the entire time, and the damage was taken to save him. They were told he was alive, awake, and recovering thanks to the efforts of the medical Sannin. A great many people had heard about it by the end of the day. But more of them had heard the Hokage's version. The younger genin would tell their parents and friends. Children of all ages were told at the academy. And some who were friends of the civilian kids spread the tale of the boy who caged the monster to the children of bigots. The next day came with an uproar. Many civilians demanded the beast be put down. But soon many more had been explained how Naruto was a hero. Most of the adult population knew about his condition, but having it finally permissible to speak about led to digging up old memories. Old pains. Children were being told several different and distorted versions of the story, some coming directly from the thoughts of a parent or from second and third-hand retellings of the shinobi version. And if a parent didn't tell their child, the child would eventually hear about it from other children. The entire village was talking about it, and when there is a lot of talk there eventually develops conflict. One civilian told their child what they thought, and another heard it from their brother, who was a genin. The two children met, and argued over it. Soon they had gathered a crowd. And soon after, one of them threw a punch. The brother and the parent both collected the fighting children. An exchange of words between them led to a shouting match. Parents of other children gathered. Some had heard the corrected version, and even had pamphlets. Others had only their own conclusions on what that beast was. Tensions rose, and the Anbu appeared. Even if the first crowd was dispersed, by the end of the second day after the law had been repealed there had been 6 others like it. None of them came to much violence. But it was enough. Just as the spymaster Sanin had predicted, Tsunade folded. As per her orders from the Toad Hermit, Azuki had gathered all the important documents, and the necessary file to unseal them. She kept them with her at all times until the Hokage called for them on the second day. Naruto's heritage was now up for release. While the village was in an uproar, Tsunade took the time she needed to ransack it. Using her status as Hokage, she granted herself the Hokage's Scroll aka Black Book, which was filled with information. She also took the Forbidden Scroll, and the Sandame's personal library. It wasn't all jutsu, it also held texts and fiction novels which he thought needed to be preserved. He had made a couple fresh copies of almost each item and sent them to the village public library, keeping his personal collection of the second fresh copies, while the originals were usually placed in a storage unit or disposed of entirely. Most of the jutsu discovered or invented in the village were either placed in the shinobi section restricted by rank, or in the Forbidden Scroll. Unless they were owned under clan law, which required either a bloodline or a large status clan. There were only a rare few jutsu that didn't go to either location. And they were in the third's personal library. As the tensions rose and the Anbu began quelling crowds, she acquired half the village treasury. She entered the many banks throughout the village with all her skills as a shinobi and placed the paperwork in order. One of Jiraiya's script duplication jutsu got her the signatures required. And she left with no one even aware she had been there at all. She had wanted to collect the Uzumaki and Namikaze assets, however only Jiraiya would know where they were. He had been the one to vanish them when the Sandame had been reinstated. Even their sensei hadn't had access to them. She settled her loot under her bed as she prepared for her night's rest. She had to be up and out early in the morning. Tomorrow her grandson would become the village's hero. Besides, that jutsu had taken more out of her than she had expected. Hopefully she would reach her destination soon. Dawn did not welcome her. She was not a morning person. Regardless, she was awake before the sun rose every day. Kuromaru followed behind the Inuzuka matriarch as she made her way to the Hokage's office. The 3 Anbu leading her and the several others following, kept a fast pace that required her partner to trot to keep up. As they arrived she caught the scents of 2 other clan heads. The Nara, and the whiny bitch. Even though the stoic Hyuga emanated royal pride from his every bone, his every pore pumped a constant stench of despair and self-pity. She hadn't ever mentioned it publicly, but when he cast his vote against the village he lost that courtesy. Entering the office she sneered at the bastard, only a few unbared teeth away from a snarl. And what has the honorable Hyuga Dono up at the ass crack of dawn? With a sniff, the Hyuga turned his body slightly away from her. Not much, but just far enough that she would see it as deliberate. A heavy sigh escaped the Hokage at her desk. It's too early in the morning for bickering, and I have something very important to get done. So if you 2 lovebirds don't mind, I suggest we get this over with. Both of the clan heads glared at her, then stepped back as she picked up a stapler and chucked it at the sleeping Nara. He sat in a chair right next to the entrance. Sume hadn't even noticed him there. Shikaku must have been awake because just before the stapler would have hit him he slouched even deeper into the chair and his head dropped just under its path. It still managed to staple his hair spike to the back of the chair. Wake up, give me back my chair. This stool is going to make my ass go numb if I sit in it any longer. Opening a dreary eye at the Hokage, the Nara's shadow lifted off the floor, winding its way up the wall behind the chair until it reached the top and came over. The strand of shadow descended onto the stapler, pulling it and the staple it hung on, out of the cushion. The shadow then lowered and set them in the Nara's waiting hand. Finally unhooked, Shikaku lazily rose from the chair and stretched. Good morning Hokage-chan, thank you for letting me use your chair. Once she had gotten her chair back, the Hokage set 3 pages on her desk. A quick glance at them told Sume exactly what she had hoped. Together, each of you are going to help me. All you need to do is confirm that there are 2 other clan heads and the Anbu commander present. Sign the paper stating that is the case, and I can take care of the rest. Blinking Sume sniffed the air, but she couldn't smell Yugo anywhere. She ain't here. The Inuzuka began, until almost right in front of her, a Neko mask appeared. Good morning. So the young woman had used genjutsu to pass her keen sense of smell. She was taking to her position quite well. Forgive me Hokage-sama, however. Can it, Hiyashi, I don't care what your dad, or the other Hyuga elders say. Are there 2 other clan heads in the room with you or not? Hiyashi visibly shrank under the Senju's glare, and took a quill. Sume didn't waste any time in signing. It was about time for this. Okay now, since you have all signed. The Godem held up the Nara's signed papers for them to see, which had been signed long enough ago that the ink had dried. I hereby release the confidential heritage of an active shinobi under my command. My grandson will be grateful to you. Hiyashi's head snapped up at her in shock. I request that you keep this on the low down. I will be announcing it at noon. Granddaughter, please join us and serve some tea. Hinata didn't hesitate. She rarely ever got called out by an elder of their clan. Even less than she was called to her father. Grandfather had never called her before. He had only ever attended one of her spars. She had only seen him in person a few times her entire life. Ever since the night when she was 3 he had secluded himself. Following him into a large lounge room she saw he wasn't alone. There were 7 others gathered. One was another Hyuga elder. His sealed forehead wore a jeweled chain, the center stone nearly covered the entire principal matrix. The cross which held the majority of the seal's functions. The others, facing the elder, were various members of the civilian council. She only recognized them because she had been required to learn their faces during her studies with Ko. They were all waiting eagerly as the 2 of them walked in. Ah, Hazami. Jushi was just telling us about your idea. Perhaps we should not speak of this with the girl. Speak freely. My granddaughter has every right to know about the demon. Besides, that was why I had my son vote in your favor, and why I assisted in repealing the law. Her grandfather sat beside his clansman. She had the tea in the kettle and set it on the heating plate, channeling her chakra into the plate to heat the tea. When using chakra to heat the plate, your focus had to be level. Too much and it heated too fast, spoiling the tea. Too little and it didn't heat fast enough, souring it and taking longer than acceptable to complete it. Her attention remained on the plate for some time, but she listened as they spoke. The demon, according to them, was locked up in the hospital with a cohort of the Senju woman's most violent. Including the snake whore. Hinata had no illusions about who the demon was. Kurenai-sensei was extremely thorough when she explained his burdens. She had tried to hide the depth of the damage done to Naruto on the mission, however both of the Hyuga girls' teammates had revealed the truth to her. The Uchiha would have died if not for her father preventing her from leaving the compound. It was as if hearing all that Naruto had been put through had damaged her. She felt broken and angry. Her father took one look at her as she returned home, contemplating her access to the Uchiha. She found herself locked in her room shortly after. Her meals the day before had been served to her by Ko. It was likely that the only reason she had been released was because her grandfather had wished it. And no one had been told exactly why she had been locked in her room. Now she sat waiting, listening. She wanted to know what they were planning for Naruto. And she found out. They couldn't perform the transfer until they were certain that the Uchiha could suppress it. So they wanted to have Naruto's chakra sealed off with the Jukin. Then after the Uchiha had damaged him enough, he would have no choice but to draw upon it. And that would let Sasuke prove his ability. Her grandfather agreed, and even advised doing this several times just to give the Uchiha practice. None of them had known how much she liked him. But she could see Jushi was clearly enjoying how her chakra output would stutter as they spoke openly about her beloved. They were talking openly about torturing him. Shakily she stood, with the tea tray. Serving her grandfather first, she stepped behind him. Behind the several cushions he and Jushi were sharing. Right in her grandfather's blind spot. She hadn't even been aware that she knew the seals her hands made. Releasing the tea, she performed them before the tray had passed her hips on their way to the floor, and her palm thrust into the back of her grandfather's head before they landed. The execution jutsu's effect was immediate, as Jushi gave an involuntary gasp and crumpled. Hazami, on the other hand, had no reaction as he fell to the floor, his brainstem completely destroyed. Had she not moved so quickly and so suddenly, they never would have been so easily defeated. Part of her recognized that. Another part, the part that had been broken, screamed at her that she couldn't let any of them live. That her actions were exactly what it had taken to save Naruto-kun. She knew deep down that she wouldn't have failed. She, the stuttering failure who couldn't even bludgeon a rat found in their kitchen, could never attack her own family, right? The council members were uncertain what had happened, and she was on them before her grandfather's body hit the ground. Leaping over him and across the room to where their cushions were positioned. They were civilians, they had no time to react to her chakra-enhanced speed. The first one died as her fingers brushed his temple. The next caught her foot in her throat, and a third who had been between the first two served as a springboard as she bounced over him. His head twisting to a loud pop. She wasn't sure what had gone through the minds of the two who attacked her. One grabbed at her arms and was easily dispatched. The other tried to throw himself bodily at her, nearly knocking her over as he died. Looking at the last one shook her to her senses. There stood her father. The councilman's throat in his hand. The man was short, so his feet dangled as her father strode into the room. His Byakugan activated for a moment and deactivated instantly. There was a snap as his wrist twisted and he dropped the dead man to the floor. Swallowing visibly, her father turned to her. "Hinata, what did you intend to accomplish?" His calm and expecting voice were mirrored by his unconcerned facial expressions. She didn't even see him move. Almost the entire village had gathered when she announced that she would be giving a public address concerning the issue on everyone's mind. They were all waiting to hear how she intended to handle the Kyuubi's vessel. "First, I would like to thank the village council for bringing this issue out into the light. It has been the spark I needed to finally take actions I should have from the beginning of my service to the village as Hokage. To honor and commemorate this occasion, I have passed an official edict. Henceforth, no laws, standards or statutes may be altered, amended or otherwise affected without the Hokage or all three of the Hokage's stand-in council present. The stand-in council as I first assigned them when I was coronated are the Sarutobi and Nara clan heads, and my apprentice." All three of them stood from where they sat, on the balcony of the Hokage's office. "Since not a single one of them were present when you released the burden of our beloved savior to the public, I felt there was no need for any of you to bear witness as I unsealed his heritage as well." A hush fell over the crowd. "Many years ago, shortly after my brother died, I entered into a physical relationship with Jiraiya, the Toad Sannin. We called it off shortly after. That received a few nervous chuckles. Her brother's death was over 40 years ago. It couldn't be the heritage she had been talking about. My son was born during a time of war. I couldn't fight knowing that he would be targeted, so I asked my sensei, the Sandaime Hokage, to hide him. When I entered into a relationship with my late husband, I chose again, not to claim my son. He grew up to be a fine shinobi. And just as I was ready to finally return home after grieving for Dan's death, the Kyuubi claimed his life. I never knew that he had wed in secret to Kushina Uzumaki. Nor did I know that she had given birth to her own son, the same day as my son's death. And it wasn't until I accepted the title of Hokage that I learned the truth of how heartless my son had been. Heartless enough to choose his duties as the Yondaime over his own son, enough to seal the demon fox into my grandson. You would expect an uproar, or dead shocked silence. Tsunade welcomed both reactions in the crowd. As of now, the only one who wouldn't know who Naruto's family tree was by the end of the night, would be the boy himself. The balloon finally popped. Water splashed all over his already soaked covers. Not the ones he slept under, but the ones they had put over him when they moved him into a wheelchair. They would be dried while he slept and brought back when he was ready to train some more. Naruto had lost count of the days he had been in the hospital. In the single room, even if they let him out of the bed, he was still trapped behind the door to the hallway. But at least he was allowed a personal bathroom and all he could eat takeout. The evil one wasn't so bad. She had made up for her prank by buying him all the ramen he wanted as long as he ate 2 sticks of dango with each meal. He was starting to like the stuff. Nowhere near as much as she did though. So all he did all day was train, sleep and listen to her gabbing on about random things. He had been able to pop a balloon with both hands from the start. So he had tried it without the rotating movements. Keeping his hands still as he popped it. That hadn't taken long, but popping it with only his right hand had taken up the rest of that day. Then he had tried to pop it with his left hand. That had taken longer. A lot longer. Taking a deep breath to calm himself, Naruto picked up a new balloon and focused his chakra to his forehead. First step in popping it on his forehead was to keep it there. Once he could hold it there without his hands for 20 minutes, he would try rotating his chakra. Hinata slept soundly. She had just killed 7 people and she was sleeping as if it was any other day. If not for his intervention, Hiyashi was certain that his daughter would have made a public attempt on the Uchiha brat's life. When he had first realized that she held feelings for that boy, he had reacted like any decent father would and made every plan he could to castrate him. Sadly, that was only after the girl had been hospitalized by her cousin. There was not much he could do to keep his father from deeming her unworthy then. It might have even been a good prospect to have allowed her to be sealed and sent her after the boy. They would have gained a great asset. But then, the vessel had beaten Neji in tribute to Hinata's honor. He had used the beast to free himself of the Hyuga's elite assault. With Neji's defeat, Hiyashi had been able to keep his daughters both unsealed for a little while longer. Thank Kami he had. She had done what he could not. She had solved so many of his problems when he could only despair. Sir, the bodies have been placed as you requested. It was Ko, her shadow. It was fitting that he be the one to be trusted with Hinata's crime. Good. Shinrei will have no means of undoing what Hinata has begun. Sir, if I may ask, what of Hinataheim? The branch servant flinched as Hiyashi fixed him with a steady look. She killed my father, in what could only be assumed as a mental breakdown. If not for her, my brother would still be alive. Or at the least I could have killed the man responsible. And then she goes and kills him for me. If I hadn't been so worried about my daughters receiving the caged bird seal and being used as a tool to control me, I would never have allowed them to be used to control me. And then, she goes and solves my problems. Ko clearly didn't understand how liberated the clan had felt. What to do with her indeed. At this point in time she is still a very useless threat. If it is discovered what she has done, then she will face worse than any fate I feared for her. And in the meantime she still represents leverage that can be used against me. The branch shinobi's eyes widened and his Byakugan flared. Holding up his hand, Hiyashi answered his question. We get rid of her. His smile was genuine, as he thought about the meeting with Tsunade. My grandson will be grateful, she had said. Hiyashi knew exactly how he was going to be rid of her. A slime clone is no ordinary clone. It could touch things like a water clone, but could take a hit like an earth clone. It wasn't bound to a range from the user. And like a shadow clone, it was conscious and self-aware. It could even return the memories it made. It was in truth, a slug clone. The smallish slug inside it was summoned and imprinted with the mind of the summoner. Then using the summoner's chakra, it formed the body of the clone out of chakra-filled secreted slime. Once the slug returned to the original summoner, it would be able to pass the memories back. And if the clone burst, then the slug could still be summoned back to transfer the memories. This made it the most effective clone technique ever created, with the minor exception that it required the slug contract. Fortunately, Tsunade happened to possess that contract. However, using it was basically a summons, a full shadow clone, and a mental link that all needed to be kept in check, taxing her mind and chakra alike as time passed. The slug clone fled silently out of the village days ago. In less than a week it had reached the capital. Wasting no time, the clone headed straight for the daimyo's palace. Not bothering to be seen by his guards or servants, the clone arrived in his audience chamber. Appearing before a guard at the door of the chamber, she grabbed him by the neck and told him in a level voice who she was. He quickly stumbled into the chamber and threw himself to the floor, requesting an audience for her. The door opened once more and she was called in. Before entering she knelt, making her way in on her hands and knees, very much unlike the Hokage she was meant to be. My lord, forgive this woman her haste, however I have had issues that keep me from speaking to you in person. As such I have sent a summons clone in my stead. Her face remained glued to the floor as she waited. Your family matters have been heard of. I was made aware of you grandson only shortly before you arrived. This could go either way. She dared not speak yet. If you're not her, then why do you speak as her? A question, that was a good sign. My lord, this summons clone is merely a vessel for my mind. I can still feel and control both it and my own body where I am in the leaf. It requires a massive amount of continuous chakra usage as well as a vast mental strain to do so. He was appeased. As they spoke he grew more and more convinced that she was in the right. Who better to care for her grandson than her? And her lover, the man who had fathered and trained the fourth Hokage, as her replacement. Once finished training the boy, she could bring him back and they would both serve as his counsel when he took his own father's legacy. She vowed on her life and family that when they returned the boy would be infinitely stronger than his father. The divine wisdom of His Royal Highness could not fault her plea. Nor her oath. The boy would be a boon to the nation of fire. And all he had to do was wait while she made it so. He granted his permission and support in all her endeavors. Days passed as the sound kunoichi lay broken in the wreckage of the forests around the Leaf Village. At this point she would almost welcome a cell in their interrogators' dungeons. She wished for death, an end to the cycles of pain and thirst. The redhead had tried several times to go without water and die of dehydration. But she could only last a few nights before the thirst drove her back to the water. At that point she didn't care that she stirred up loose soil, she would drink that as well. And not only that, but the blood and grime that washed from her face and hair when she plunged them into the water. She had almost choked on a floating tangle of her hair when she tried to swallow it down, still attached to her head. As always, the moment she ingested the fluids, her body began screaming in agony. She was constantly in pain, however when she dried out, it wasn't as overwhelming and mind-shredding. She had lost all feeling in her lower half. If not for the few short glimpses of her legs she had seen when forcing her way out from under the tree, she would have a hard time believing they were even still there. She was certain she had a fever, and most of her upper body was simply in too much pain to move until the thirst overpowered the pain. If not for that one final use of her cursed seal, she would have never survived this long. Not only did it provide her the strength to free herself, but it seemed to have burned enough of the superficial flesh that it closed off most of her bleeding wounds. Now it seemed to have broken down. It was still there, she felt it every now and then. She thought once or twice that she had seen its active branches moving over her after she had passed out from the pain that becoming hydrated caused. But she couldn't use it, and sometimes when she felt it breaking down further, every cell in her body lit up with pain beyond anything she had ever felt. Each time was worse, and she prayed that the next time killed her. In the rare moments she was aware enough to comprehend her thoughts, she wondered how she was still alive. She had even willed up the resolve to grasp for a kunai at one point. If she could reopen a wound she could bleed to death. Her labored and blind groping found nothing where her kunai were held. They must have come off in the damage. Tayuya woke once more from drinking until the pain put her into shock. Her cursed seal was also once more active and searing her flesh. But that wasn't the pain that woke her. She woke to a tearing pain in her lower body. She hadn't felt anything down there since she had gotten free. Her entire body jerked as it was yanked an arm's length away from the water pool. Looking back at the mangled flesh of her lower body, the tortured girl saw movement, not her own movement for either. What she saw was a dark shadow at where she assumed her knee was. She felt another yank and tearing pain shot up from her leg. The reality of what was happening finally settled. She was being eaten. Desperately she flung her arms out at the creature. It flinched, but latched its jaw deeper into her leg. Twisting over, the girl clawed at the dirt, grasping for anything that she could get a hold of. Her hand found a root and she pulled. The curse mark glowed bright with its remaining chakra, fueling her desire to live. Pulling against the dragging of the beast, the broken teen struggled to pull herself into the pool of water. She didn't want to die. She didn't want to be eaten like this. Taking what air she could into her lungs, she screamed, "Please, no, someone, anyone, help me, come in." The door to the Hokage's private study, as it had become since she commandeered it, opened to reveal Hyuga Hiyashi. It was a good thing that Tsunade had already replaced the legal statutes over her true intentions. She didn't want his prying eyes to see anything too sensitive to her plan. "Hokage-sama, I have been locked into a very unique position. And the only solution I see for it, is to have my daughter removed from the village. No greeting or respect or even a damned bow." The Hyuga simply began talking. Through her annoyance, the once again busty and youthful-looking blonde took note of his minor body language tells. Once she found out that the man's spine still belonged to his father, she had been able to adjust her read on him, and it seemed she may have adjusted it wrong. His stance was firmer. He was less beaten down. Tsunade almost considered checking with Sume to see if his scent of pathetic had changed. Keep going. The Hokage didn't have all day for him to just ask to send his daughter away. She was a busy woman. With a deep exhale, the Hyuga clan head made his demand. I request you include Hinata in your plans to abscond with your grandson." The medical Sannin had Hiyashi pinned the moment she registered exactly what he had said. She held his arms behind him in one hand and locked at an angle that would shatter them if he struggled, and her other hand was resting safely around his neck. "What would you know of my plans? I saw what you were doing. I saw you quietly gathering the Senju assets, and I know you're the one who forged those release forms from the village treasurer. Please, Senju, all I desire from you is that you take Hinata with you. I'll pay any price I can," he pleaded. "Why?" the Hokage demanded. A focused concentration of her killing intent washed over him. With her mental control, he was probably the only one to feel it. "She attacked my father, and others he was attending to. She killed them all. I will not let my daughter be killed for something that I believe was the just thing to do." That was news. The shy little Hyuga had almost pulled an Itachi. And Hiyashi wanted to save her? The Hyuga continued once the Sannin relaxed her grip on his throat. "In 2 days' time, if I haven't shifted the suspicion onto someone else, then the bodies will be found and she will receive the caged bird seal. Once she has it, as punishment for her crime, she will be put to death by means of the feather cutting." His face was grim and slightly greening from the thought of his daughter going through that. It is one of the most painful deaths permitted outside the interrogation rooms. Each nerve in her body will be given the full amount of pain stimuli it can take until it ruptures. The execution will last until every single nerve in her body is destroyed. That was by far the most gruesome thing coming from the Hyuga clan that the medic had ever heard of. "Hinata has had affections for your grandson since she was in the academy, and if the least she can do for you is to be his bed toy, then she will be more useful to you alive than she is to me dead." Tsunade was convinced. She actually didn't have a problem taking the girl. Having a Hyuga along to help would be invaluable. Not only because she would be able to help Scout, but also because she would be able to help correct Naruto's chakra control. The little detail about her having affections for him was also quite welcome. Now that the cat was out of the bag, Naruto might have been getting all kinds of suitors. Some wanting him for his heritage, others would want to see if breeding with a Jinchuriki could create a new bloodline, which it actually could. But no need to let them know that. Fully releasing the stoic man, Tsunade returned to her seat. He had said any price, right? "I want all of the Hyuga clan jutsu. Simple tricks, chakra control techniques, advanced jutsu, forbidden, all of it." Hiyashi nodded vigorously. "I want you to vote against the extraction from now on. You will assist Jiraiya in regaining all the legal powers of the Hokage's hat from the council. You will support him in any other half-cocked scheme he has to fix the village, and you will provide him with the full examination and specifics of the caged bird seal." The first few of her demands had been for granted. But the last one was something the Toad Sannin had failed to obtain since before his student had made Hokage. The Hyuga clan had been fighting to keep the seal out of his hands for decades. And she wanted Hiyashi to simply hand it over. The Hyuga clan head didn't even hesitate. "If you can ensure his support in ousting the rest of the Hyuga elders off my back, I'll give our sealmaster to the Yamanaka." The pledge was clear. But the Sannin was the only one Tsunade actually trusted with that kind of secret. As untrustworthy as he was with others, seals were the key to bringing the real shinobi out in him. Tsunade and Hiyashi had discussed their bargain for almost an hour before she finally dismissed him. This little Hyuga girl had already earned more than her travel ticket. If Hiyashi had started out with the fact that his daughter had slaughtered 6 of the civilian council members who had voted to extract the Kyuubi, she might have given the girl a medal. She could have killed the damn idiot for waiting to bring that up until she asked what he was planning to do with the bodies. He had been so focused on convincing her to save his daughter, he didn't even think that she might have done it just to repay the girl's accomplishments. And on top of that, with Hiyashi's father no longer around to hold the caged bird seal over his daughters, he was willing to change his vote too. If not for the fact that Tsunade was certain they would have the deceased replaced by the next council meeting, she might have thought about waiting to see how it turned out before they fled. 8 dead in total, and all of their bodies had already been planted in another Hyuga elder's private storage unit off the compound. Hyuga Shinrei and his wife were 2 of the 4 Hyuga elders that didn't bear the seal. Of the 7 elders, 4 of them would soon be out of the way. The first 2 were Hiyashi's father and a sealed elder which Hinata had killed. And these next 2 left only 2 sealed elders and 1 unsealed elder for Hiyashi to settle with. Her Anbu set out to find the missing council members shortly after Hiyashi left. They searched half the village before one of them found the bodies. Calling the Hyuga and his wife to their storage unit, the Hokage outright charged them both with the murders. The elder denied it of course, and tried to declare his innocence. He had been innocent, of that crime at least. But if this was what it took to keep Hiyashi silent, then she would do what was needed. The Hokage smashed open the storage unit. It was unlocked. Hell, they had already been inside and checked, the bodies were there. Smashing her way in was just one tiny piece of her task. She silenced him every time he tried to speak. His attempts to cooperate were treated as if he were impeding her. She ripped open the one of the chests that the bodies were in and the Hyuga flinched. He hadn't been willing to activate his bloodline to scan his own property with her there, so he truly had no idea their bodies actually were there. She grabbed his neck and slammed him into the chest, asking him in a mocking voice, "If these aren't the bodies of the missing council members, then who exactly did you kill?" Throwing him back, she glared with only moderate killing intent. "Are you going to tell me who it was you killed, or should I just go through all of your things?" She ripped open a new container and smashed the contents onto the floor. His Byakugan flared, and Neko's blade parted his head at eye level. Provoking his attack gave her the opening to silence him, and his death would look to the civilians as if she truly were impartial when it came to the law. All they would see is that she had punished the one responsible for the deaths of their fellows. The shinobi would see what it truly was, the coup of the Hyuga clan. The man's wife was also placed under arrest. They were both about as old as Sensei. A heart attack would make complete sense given the circumstances. And as the medical examiner, she could easily ensure that was what it looked like. Easily, when she considered what was at stake. As days passed since the announcement that Naruto was not only the son of the fourth but also the grandson of the fifth Hokage and another of the Sannin, the villagers met conflict. Those who had previously been all for the shinobi version of Naruto's burden now rallied en masse towards his heritage. Almost all of the younger generations had been convinced. Their friends and peers all shouted for Naruto's glory, so the few who didn't actually believe simply followed their lead. The last remaining shinobi who held prejudice against him couldn't refute the evidence of his lineage. Yet, even with all of the support Naruto was now receiving, the council members she observed in her sensei's crystal were determined as ever to extract the Kyuubi. In the defense of most of the shinobi in that group, many of them had decided that they needed to find a way of doing so without killing him. To free him of his burden, Ino Yamanaka led the charge of the Rookie 12 to obtain visitation rights. So many of Naruto's classmates were demanding to see him, or to get messages to him. One in particular was of interest to the Hokage. The white-eyed girl would receive her summons early in the morning, and her father had ensured it wouldn't be seen. It was early morning when the young Hyuga arrived at the Senju compound. Her father had sent Ko to escort her unseen, which in the Hyuga compound meant far more than it did to the rest of the village. As she stepped through the gate, the girl couldn't help but feel terror. She had committed murder. She had killed 7 people and forced her father to kill the 8th. She accepted the last death as her own kill as well. But worse than that, she had killed the Hyuga clan's most honored. Her own grandfather. Hinata felt awful. Not for killing them, but for being able to without any remorse. What kind of horrible person was she? How could she kill her own family and not feel remorse? As Ko led her to the foyer of the Hokage's clan residence, Hinata felt dread, couldn't help but whimper when Ko closed the door behind her, leaving her alone to face the Sannin. What would Tsunade-sama do to her? Lady Tsunade herself was already waiting for them. Her ever-present assistant had a change of clothes and hygiene supplies in a small basket. Were they going to imprison her here? The young Hyuga was too worried to puzzle out the meaning of the basket. She actually flinched when the matriarch spoke. "Good morning, I know you must. Okay, you can stop cowering, you're not in any trouble. We've successfully disposed of the bodies and we're prepared to ensure you never see the fallout, but I need your help with something in exchange." Hinata couldn't follow her orders about the cowering, but the rest of it was hardly believable. What could she possibly do to help the Hokage? Why would anything she did get her pardoned? "Listen, Hinata, you may have heard, but my grandson is in danger, and I need someone with your particular talents to help me escape with him. The best part is that I know you won't fuck up. You have no choice in where to place your allegiance. If you don't come with us, You will suffer the feather cutting, and my grandson may very well die. Grandson? Hinata had been locked away in the Hyuga compound. She knew there had been some big news about the Senju's family, but no one had bothered to give her any specifics. Not that she really cared at the time. She was more worried about Naruto-kun, and the consequences of her own crimes. I guess Hiyashi Baka didn't explain. Here's the short of it. The veteran shinobi leaned against the wall and took a breath in preparation for her explanation. Me and Jiraiya, the toad Sannin, hooked up, and I gave birth to the boy who would later become the fourth Hokage. He hooked up with the last Uzumaki and she gave birth to Naruto. My son couldn't kill the Kyuubi, so he sealed it into his son. In order to hide Naruto, the Sandame hid this information from everybody. I didn't know my son even had a kid. The Hokage took a pause to gather more air. When I became Hokage, I found out about all the little secrets the third Hokage kept, including this one. Now, during the mission to retrieve the Uchiha, Naruto accessed the Kyuubi's chakra, which the Uchiha then suppressed using his Sharingan. Because he was able to do this, the village council thinks that if they extract the Kyuubi and put it in the little bastard, the Uchiha could fully control its power. They completely dismissed that fact that he abandoned the village for the power Orochimaru offered him. The extraction process would kill Naruto. And thanks to my sensei, there is no legal way to get around their plan. So, I am going to sneak Naruto out of the village and hide him away. Once more the lady needed to take a deep gasp for air. This time, however, she did not continue. Instead, Shizune spoke up, placing her hand on her master's shoulder. Your father came to us after you attacked the council members. Good job on that, by the way. The Hokage interrupted her student with a breathless grin. Anyway, she continued, he has noticed our preparations and has offered us a deal. If we smuggle you out of the village whilst he disposes of the bodies, then he will support our escape and the plans we have to reclaim the Hokage's authority so that we can return. When we do, the Hokage continued once more, you will be pardoned for any and all crimes committed whether you were caught or not. And to sweeten the deal, I'm willing to give you my blessing to pursue Naruto romantically. The information was just too much. Everything they had told her had her head spinning, and it only took that last statement to finish her off. The Hyuga turned a bright red and dropped. Shizune was quick on her feet to catch the girl, and they had her set down and breathing a moment later. Though the girl was too dizzy or perhaps embarrassed to speak, she was still able to nod her head with enthusiasm when asked if she agreed. Haruno Sakura refused to get out of bed. When her mother had tried to simply rip her covers off and drag her out, she went limp and allowed herself to drop to the ground. She didn't even react to the crack of her head bouncing on the floor. Her mother did though, and even more so because she hadn't. The woman pleaded and begged. What was wrong? Sakura didn't have the stomach to admit it to herself, much less tell her mom that her sensei had officially dropped her from the shinobi program. The day after Naruto's heritage was announced, Sakura had been floored to hear about it. She had been waiting eagerly for Sasuke to get out of the hospital so she could congratulate him on his promotion. She hadn't been so surprised when her mother told her about Naruto's burden. She felt guilty for the way she treated him. Sure, but she couldn't change it, and he had still acted the way he had to get treated that way in the first place. Ino couldn't agree. So when the blonde came over to tell her who his father and grandparents were, she felt more like she had lost an argument. Finally the day came when Sasuke was supposed to be released, and she headed right over to the bridge to meet him. What she met was her sensei with an envelope crumpled in his shaking angry fist. She was so scared she almost couldn't get close enough to accept it. And when she asked if Sasuke was going to join them soon, he simply vanished. That was how she found out that he had requested her dismissal from the shinobi ranks. Inside the envelope were her dismissal papers, a copy of the formal request of discharge, as well as her sensei's own written report of misconduct and a short letter from the Godem herself. She was so stunned about the dismissal it took her a while to begin reading the rest. Her sensei's description of her physical and emotional abuse of her teammate was harsh and most of it unjustified. While technically he hadn't said anything false, the contexts of the incidents were distorted. And then she read the letter. The Hokage expressed her deepest contempt for her and her actions against her grandson. She didn't say anything outright, but the subtext was clear. She was under suspicion of treason in the first degree. Any actions that would barely even hint that they could justify her death would result in them doing so. At first she hadn't wanted to accept it. But when Ino had explicitly rejected her, followed by her abject alienation from almost all of the genin she knew, Sakura had lost hope. She went to bed and hadn't moved the rest of the day. Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. Naruto was the fucking son of the fucking Yondaime. Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. Uchiha Sasuke had been so close to killing him, and had even convinced himself to try again. But how the fuck could he do that now? The Dobi was the son of the yellow fucking Flash, the grandson of the current Hokage. Truly his guardians were senile. With this information, the young clan heir had once again decided that Naruto deserved to live after all he had been through. He declared as much the moment he had gotten out of the hospital. That was how he found himself right back in that damned hospital bed. He would be held there until the extraction and transfer were complete. Or at least, that's what the bandaged old bastard thought. Sasuke had learned more from Naruto than he really cared to admit. But for once, he had to laugh at the sheer fortune he'd had, being on the Baka's team. All of Naruto's tricks to escape the hospital were now his to employ. He would go straight to the Hokage and tell her he had nothing to do with the extraction plan, and they had him held against his will with some sort of seal. He should probably do some begging for his life while he was at it. He kind of did almost kill the stubborn Baka. His foolproof plan lasted just until he got to the Hokage's office. She wasn't there. He quickly found her apprentice working her shift back at the hospital. As he was about to call her over, the renegade Uchiha felt his body lock up as the seal took hold over him. Deciding to not talk to her and instead go look for the Hokage herself, seemed to do the trick. He was mobile again. Since he was mobile, he headed right back to the medic. Again, the moment he opened his mouth, the seal took hold once more. This time it came with pain as well. Well, that sucks. The Uchiha knew exactly what was going on. Deciding to go buy lunch, he left his immobile location and ordered his food from the nearest vendor. As long as he never tried to reveal the seal and possibly other sensitive information that the eye thief wanted kept silent, he was free to move around. But the seal would prevent him from letting the Hokage know any of what was going on. So how would Naru Baka get around it? Naruto had to laugh, in joy and in pride. It had taken him only a week to pop the balloon on his forehead. Oba Baka thought it would take him twice that. Sure, it took way more work to keep it there at the same time, but he had managed it. Once he was able to hold the water balloon on his forehead while still rotating the chakra, it became smooth sailing. As he tried to maneuver himself so he could attach a pair of water balloons to the bottoms of his feet, his current companion interrupted. The Anbu guy had been silent this whole time. Outside of the official statements and questions, he didn't say a damn word. Even when Naruto threw his water balloon at him, he merely caught it and placed it on the pile. This time, however, the Anbu spoke. It would be more effective to bridge the control gap with smaller steps. Nani? You're moving to your feet too soon. It would be more effective to try one in each hand at the same time so that you can get the hang of doing two at once. I suggest doing them on your knuckles with your fists closed. Then attempt to do it on your feet. Well, it made sense. Besides, how much time could that take? Making fists, he set each one on a full balloon and lifted them out of the bucket, attached to the outside of his hand by chakra. Just like he had with his forehead. Focusing his chakra to spin, the determined genin had to accept that the Anbu had been right. Popping two at once was its own step. He spent most of the day working on it, trying to pop them both. He ended up popping either one or the other several times. However, the goal was to get them to pop at the same time. Making his chakra match in each hand was harder than he thought. The day ended when Shizune returned to move him from his wheelchair back into bed. He tried to complain and insist that he could walk already, but she only needed to pull out one of her syringes to make him obey. The last time he had tried to walk on his own, she had actually used the sedative. I have some good news for you today, Naruto-kun. Shiny Nae smiled with excitement. Am I getting out? Can I have visitors? Are you letting go of the stupid no walking thing? Naruto knew the answer was no on all accounts, but he had to ask. I'm sorry, Naruto, but we are going to be one step closer. His nurse sighed. Tomorrow, you will receive your psychological review. And how is that good news? He replied, maybe a little harsher than he wanted to. Well, it means that we only have to hold you here until we can get Jiraiya-sama to check your seal. Tsunade-sama should also be here before the review to do your final physical. And yes, Naruto-kun, after that, you will be allowed out of the wheelchair. Her matter-of-fact tone made his snapping at her all the worse. As he lay in bed that night, like all the other nights since he woke, Naruto entered his mind. Arriving at the cage, the genin rushed past the bars to see how the resident was doing. Since the fox had woken up, he had been flushing Naruto's system with any unused chakra he had. He was still only half as big as before, but he had gained back much of his lost strength. According to the fox, he was roughly 27% his full size. Naruto did the math, and the fox told him that when he was sealed here, half of him had been sealed away elsewhere. Tonight the fox was in a much better mood. Before Naruto could ask, he spoke. "I heard the good news, Naruto. Does that mean you'll have something new to assault my ears with?" The beast smirked. Since when did he smirk? "Hey, I can always give you the silent treatment. Leave you in here with your boredom. I should be so lucky." The massive furball grumbled under its breath. "Well, maybe if you behave I will. But for now, what do you think the psych review is going to be like?" Naruto ran right up to him and took a seat in front his large paws. "How should I know? I've never been to one either." The fox retorted. "Well, maybe you should get one." The blonde laughed playfully. "It might make you less grumpy." They bantered a bit longer before Naruto was finally ready to drift off to another restless sleep. Stepping around the large animal, Naruto found a hollow under his tenant's arm and cuddled up in the fox's fur. The Kyuubi, as always, began griping about him laying on him. He had told the boy repeatedly that he wasn't a rug or a pillow or a blanket or anything else you sleep on. But nonetheless, as the boy slipped away, his tails curled around the smaller body, covering him in downy red fur. The monthly village council meeting was finally here. They hadn't bumped it up too far. It had only been 2 weeks since his heritage was released. And that happened over a week after the first vote. Still, a solid 25 days had been enough time for her to make her plans. The council meeting would be held tomorrow. And to that end, she was currently attending the 3 shit for brains that had caused all this mess. Mostly Kaharu. Tsunade wanted to strangle her. Danzo had been unaware of Kaharu's plan to repeal the Sandame's law. Why give away a secret you don't have to? Right? Now he and the 2 old bats had come to see her to discuss the ramifications of her own released information. At first, after she had released it, Tsunade had thought they might have a chance to avert the whole thing. Support poured in for her grandson along with apologies and well-wishers and even a couple marriage requests. Kami, was she right about that one? However, less than a week after her announcement, word got around that the Sharingan could control the Kyuubi. Shortly later it spread that Naruto had actually let the beast out in his fight during the retrieval mission and had almost killed the Uchiha when he did so. Of course, because the Uchiha was officially on an assassination mission and an ally at the time, this was devastating. Not only did it put Naruto in a darker light, it also correlated with their claims that Sasuke had beaten Naruto with his dujutsu. Once people knew he was actively using the fox's chakra, his match against Neji in the finals of the Chunin selection exams had even been called into question. He had used it there. And so now there was the issue of overturning his victory and promoting Neji to Chunin floating around. Because of these few rumors, a vast amount of the support that they had received recoiled away as if burned. And according to the 3 crones, she had made a mistake when she released his true identity. However, the damage was done and it was time that at the next meeting, she should release all of the heir's assets to the village and the village treasure. Basically, they wanted to confiscate anything that might have been owed to Naruto. Thankfully, not even her sensei had had access to it. Jiraiya had ensured that. He had permanently sealed away both the Uzumaki and the Namikaze estates and locked all their assets away where only he could retrieve them. This included all the jutsu, cash and properties they owned. The Sannin had already made good on relocating the Uzumaki shrine. It had vanished without a trace. But what to say to the fools? Well, it was a clan matter, right? And those had to be done in the council. And that could only be done with a Hokage or her staff present. Dismissing them with that line of excuses and a cold glare, Tsunade pulled out her legal forms. It was time to put the game into play. She wrote down all of her new edicts and sealed them into law. She already had the support needed to do it. All of the signatures were already available. Finally, she filed them into the various sections of the legal archives that they fell under and sealed copies of them into a dossier which she would soon have delivered to the meeting. She had wanted to do something to get back at the little Uchiha prick for what he did to her grandson. However, as she had told them, all clan matters had to be discussed at the village council, to prevent the Hokage from harming the standing of the clans. It was an issue that had been placed there by the Shodan and she couldn't get around it. But at least she could confine him to the hospital until he had a full medical and psychological workup. To ensure there were no vestiges of the snake left him, of course. No one wanted that bastard to get his hand on the Kyuubi, right? Naruto breathed in the fresh open air of the sky above him. He was currently on the roof of the hospital. It wasn't freedom and he was under guard, but it was the best they would provide for him. His only attempt to simply exit via roof hop had him bent over Neko-chan's knee. He wasn't going to risk finding out what the snake woman would do to him. But he was still in the open air at least. That had only happened because Ino's dad had determined what he had known all along. The biggest threat his mind was handling was being cooped up. The man's report clearly stated that if he were not proved with at least rooftop access, he would soon begin smashing things at random until he made his way outside. According to the Yamanaka, he had suffered no adverse damage from the trauma he went through. Even more surprising was that he hadn't simply repressed it the way normal trauma would be. No, he had fully processed the pain and moved on. He wasn't having nightmares or any post-trauma reactions at all. His restless nights were from being backed up with a buildup of his usually already pent-up excessive energy. Shortly put, he was literally being bored to death. So he was given an hour out of every 6 to spend on the roof. Just before that, Oba-chan had given him a checkup on his physical side of things and found nothing wrong with him. The only odd thing was that his chakra levels were almost 40% higher than they had been before the mission to get Sasuke back. After discussing it with the mind doctor, she determined that he had simply been building up the excess chakra the same way he had with his mental energy. And that if he got some physical activity in, then his coils would be less strained. So for the next few days the hyper teen got to reacquaint himself with how awesome it was to be out of a wheelchair and on his own feet. It took a while for that to happen. He hadn't walked for over a month. His legs, while healed completely, were still weak. Even Fur Mountain couldn't do much to help. It did go away. In about an hour he was walking just fine. He still wasn't allowed to run or anything, but he was in a hospital so he wouldn't have been allowed to anyway. That night though, he slept so much better than he had since he first woke up. The next day he felt as if everything was so much easier. Like a huge pressure had been released. He managed to get both water balloons on each fist to pop at the same time after only few tries. For the rest of the time he spent there he had been either out walking, doing minor in-room exercises or getting drilled in agility and stretching by his guards on the roof. At first his feet would quickly get a little sore from the walking again after so long, but the moment that stopped happening he was sitting cross-legged as he tried to do the first step of the Rasengan on his soles. Naruto had finished the short routine the Anko had him do when she watched him and turned to see that she was no longer there. Where she had been lounging was now the Hokage herself. Accepting another one of her spine-cracking hugs, Naruto returned the embrace. It felt like home, whatever he even meant by that. He just felt so happy when she held him. As if everything down to the itch between his toes no longer bothered him. Parting, the Hokage made an announcement. "Pack your toothbrush, Gaki. We're going on a road trip." It took next to no time for Naruto to start bubbling with joy, but he didn't get a chance to reply as she held her hand over his mouth. "Jiraiya is in a village a few days from here, and since you have a clean bill of health and overwhelming evidence that not going out is going to damage you, I have decided not to wait till he gets here. We're going to meet him where he is for your seal check. We leave bright and early tomorrow morning." Having finally explained the situation, the Sannin released his face and stepped back so he could do his dance of joy. In the dead of night, a small group left the village gates. There were 2 unidentified women and 2 Anbu. Likely they were being escorted out of the village for some reason. One of the women was pulling a cart behind her. Her hooded cloak hid her face and other features, however the other one was not as shy. Her aged face only slightly resembled the Hokage's apprentice, which was more noticeable because a third woman strode up behind the 2 Anbu. The Hokage herself had come to see them out of the village. Tsunade locked and sealed the Hokage's office as she left it earlier that day. It could only be opened again by her or her successor. The seals Jiraiya placed on Senju compound had been activated too. Now just like the Uzumaki and Namikaze estates, it was lost to the village. All of the acquired supplies and documents had been collected and packed well. Most were stored in storage sealing scrolls. There was an entire case full of those scrolls in the cart, along with another case of her other acquired scrolls. Beneath them were the two prized cases. These contained 2 sleeping children. Both had been sedated chemically and via genjutsu. It was time for the big finale. The council meeting, which she had been dreading for the last month, was now beginning. It was time for her to finish the greatest "go screw yourself" this village had ever seen. Looking around the room, Tsunade knew that there wasn't a single civilian on the council that would vote against the extraction. And a small portion of the shinobi had already made their standing clear. She knew that the vote would be for the death of her grandson. As the meeting began, Tsunade decided to address as many issues as she could before the final hurrah. Passing over the many budget issues, she worked methodically in providing the full rational judgment. The conclusion of the Chunin exam match was reverted, however she still denied the Hyuga boy a promotion because the ruling was that he had fought too headstrong, and that was a failure on his part no matter the opponent's action. Her medical restriction on the Uchiha boy carried through seamlessly, and finally they had the guts to bring up the centerpiece of the meeting. Which prompted her to make her move. Before we begin that nasty mess, I have one last item to cover. I have an edict to present, which has already been sealed into law by the daimyo himself. The surprised murmurs around the room included hushed whispers of, "Daimyo? And, when?" As per official royal decree, all items of this edict have been passed at the commencement of its declaration to the council vested with the village's operation. So signed by the honored Lord Daimyo. Her audience hushed so she could read the decree, the seal of the lord of their country shown to all of them. Firstly, Senju Tsunade, Sannin of the Slug Contract and 5th Hokage of this village hidden in the leaves, does grant apprenticeship to Genins Uzumaki Naruto and Hyuga Hinata. Secondly, as the master and sensei of said genin, it is deemed that they are worthy of promotion to Chunin rank. Such promotions are thusly granted. Thirdly, as Hokage and head of the Senju clan, Senju Tsunade releases all assets and holdings of the Senju clan to herself. Fourthly, as Hokage and speaking on behalf of the Namikaze heir, Senju Tsunade does release all assets and holdings of the Namikaze clan to the grandfather of the Namikaze heir. Fifthly, as Hokage and speaking on behalf of the Uzumaki heir, Senju Tsunade does release all assets and holdings of the Uzumaki clan to the grandfather of the Uzumaki heir. Sixthly, as Hokage of the Leaf Village, Senju Tsunade appoints Anbu Commander Yugo Izuki and Anbu Ranksman Yamato as her personal guard, retaining all authority of their previous ranks and titles. Seventhly, as Hokage of the Leaf Village, Senju Tsunade releases to herself 1/2 of the monetary village assets, the Forbidden Scroll and the Hokage Library. Eighthly, as Hokage, Senju Tsunade pardons any and all crimes, known or otherwise committed by all shinobi aforementioned. Ninthly, as Hokage, Senju Tsunade appoints Jiraiya the Sannin of the Toad Contract to be her successor and heir of the authority and position of the 6th Hokage. Should the 5th Hokage cease to possess ruling title, the village hidden in the leaves shall cease and desist all current and future missions of ranks B and above until such time as the selected successor is coronated. At the time of the coronation, said limitation shall be raised to ranks A and above for the first 3 months of his holding office. Tenthly, as Hokage of this Leaf Village, I hereby release myself and my students as well as my 2 personal bodyguards, all retaining authority and ranks, from the service of the Leaf Village, and retire from my position. With that said, any further legal discussion shall be considered without the presence of the Hokage or their chosen representatives. As you may remember, by edict passed and sealed with the blessings of the daimyo, such actions are considered treason. I only came back to this village to be with my grandson. If he isn't safe staying here, then there is no reason for me to stay either. This village is full of slime, so you shouldn't have much problem with me leaving it that way. With that final announcement, the slug summons containing her mind dispelled, and the slime clone burst. Its shell of chakra no longer holding the hyper-condensed slime and the substance that made up the body, clothing and even the hat of the clone gushed forth in a wave that expanded as the slime uncompressed, soaking every single person in the room. The Hokage was gone. She had abandoned the village. She had become the highest-ranked missing ninja there had ever been. She was. That's all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.